April 22nd, 1943. Commander James Sullivan sat alone in his cabin aboard the USS Bainbridge, a fountain pen trembling slightly in his right hand. The North Atlantic rolled beneath the destroyer's hull, each wave a metronome counting down the hours until morning, until the mission, until what might be his final dawn. The paper before him was expensive, pearl white, heavy stock, the kind Sarah had insisted he take with him when he shipped out from Norfolk 2 years ago. She said a proper officer should write proper letters home, letters worth keeping, letters worth reading again and again if he never came back. Now staring at that pristine whiteness, Sullivan understood why she had chosen it so carefully. He pressed pen to paper. "My dearest Sarah," he wrote, and the ink spread like dark blood across the page. "If you are reading this, it means I did not come back. But I need you to know that what we are about to do tomorrow night goes against every rule they taught us at Annapolis, every tactical doctrine, every principle of naval warfare." His hand paused. Outside his cabin, he could hear the muffled sounds of his crew preparing for evening quarters, footsteps on steel decks, the distant clang of a hatch closing. Normal sounds, comforting sounds, the sounds of men who trusted him to bring them home. "We are going to let 8 German submarines surround us," he continued writing. "We are going to position ourselves exactly where they can find us. We are going to make ourselves look weak, vulnerable, like easy prey. And then, Sarah, we are going to kill every single one of them." The pen stopped again. Sullivan set it down and reached into his breast pocket, pulling out a set of dog tags. They were not his own. The metal was tarnished, darkened by salt air and time. He held them up to the light of his desk lamp, reading the stamped letters for the 1000th time. Sullivan John P. Radio Man, 2nd Class USS Arizona, his younger brother. 22 years old on December 7, 1941. 22 years old when the Japanese bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. 22 years old when the Arizona exploded and took 1,177 men down with her into the oil-slicked water. Johnny had never made it off the ship. His body was still there 3 years later, entombed in twisted steel at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. All Sullivan had were these tags. Someone had found them floating in the harbor the day after, sent them to their mother in Pennsylvania. She had given them to James at Johnny's memorial service. "Bring them home when you win this war," she had whispered, pressing the cold metal into his palm. "Bring him home." Sullivan closed his fist around the dog tags, now feeling their weight, feeling the edges bite into his skin. Johnny would never come home. But maybe, just maybe, Sullivan could honor his memory, could make his death mean something, could kill the men who allied themselves with the nation that started this whole damn war. He picked up his pen again. "I carry Johnny's tags with me every day. You know this. But tonight they feel heavier than ever. Tomorrow we face 8 submarines, 48 men on each boat, 396 German sailors in total, 396 men with families. Mothers, sweethearts, children waiting for them." Sullivan's hand was steadier now, the words flowing faster. "And yet we must do this, because if we don't, those same 396 men will sink convoy after convoy. We'll send thousands of our merchant sailors to the bottom. We'll starve Britain. We'll prolong this war. We'll kill more men like Johnny." He signed the letter, folded it, sealed it in an envelope with Sarah's name written across the front in his careful script. Then he placed it in his desk drawer next to 11 other sealed envelopes. One for each month he had been at sea, each one marked with the same instruction: "To be delivered in the event of my death." The knock on his cabin door came exactly at 2100 hours. 3 sharp raps. Professional, precise. "Enter," Sullivan called. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Reed stepped through the doorway, his executive officer's face drawn tight with tension. Reed was 40, a veteran of the First World War who had seen what submarines could do to surface ships, who had pulled drowning men from burning oil slicks, who knew exactly what tomorrow night might bring. "The captains are assembled in the wardroom, sir," Reed said quietly. "They're waiting." Sullivan stood buttoning his jacket. He tucked Johnny's dog tags back into his breast pocket where they always rode, right over his heart, where they could stop a bullet if it came to that, where they could remind him with every breath why this mission mattered. "How are they?" Sullivan asked. Reed hesitated. "Scared, sir. Trying not to show it, but scared." "Good," Sullivan said. "Fear keeps you sharp. Fear keeps you alive. It's the men who aren't scared who get killed. They walked together through the narrow passageways of the Bainbridge, their footsteps ringing on the steel deck plates. The destroyer was a Fletcher-class ship, brand new, commissioned just 8 months ago. 2,100 tons of modern American naval engineering, 376 feet from bow to stern, 39 feet wide. Could make 38 knots when she really opened up. She was beautiful, deadly, the most advanced destroyer in the world, and tomorrow night she would be bait. The wardroom was thick with cigarette smoke when Sullivan entered. 4 men rose to attention, their khaki uniforms pressed sharp despite the long days at sea. These were his captains, his squadron commanders, the men who would lead their ships into hell tomorrow night and somehow, God willing, lead them out again. "As you were gentlemen," Sullivan said, waving them back to their seats. He took his place at the head of the table, spreading a navigation chart across its surface. Red pencil marks showed the position of 8 German submarines stretched across a 100-mile front like an underwater picket fence. Lieutenant Commander Chen, Sullivan began, looking at the first officer. "You have concerns. I want to hear them." Michael Chen was 35, slim and tense, with dark eyes that seemed to see through everything. He had started his career as a submarine officer before transferring to destroyers. He knew how U-boat crews thought, how they hunted, how they killed. "Sir," Chen replied carefully, "what we're proposing goes against every tactical principle I've ever learned. We're going to position ourselves in the center of a wolf pack. Let them converge on us. Put ourselves in a position where we're surrounded on all sides by enemy submarines that can fire torpedoes from any direction." He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "Commander, I've been on submarines. I know how they operate. Once those U-boats detect us, their first instinct will be to call in the pack, to coordinate. And when they realize we're destroyers, not merchants, they're going to put spreads of torpedoes in the water immediately. We'll be facing perhaps 40 torpedoes coming at us from 8 different directions, in the dark, with no way to evade them all." Sullivan nodded slowly. "You're right. Every word you just said is true." The other captains shifted in their seats. Lieutenant Commander Robert Jackson, commander of the USS Montgomery, spoke next. He was 38, stocky, with thick fingers that seemed too large for the delicate work of naval charts. But those same fingers could calculate firing solutions faster than any other officer Sullivan had ever met. "Sir," Jackson said, "I have 3 children. My oldest boy is 8. If I don't come back from this, my wife will be alone with 3 kids and a military pension that won't feed them properly. I need to know this mission is worth that risk." Sullivan met his eyes. "It is." "How can you be sure?" "Because intelligence tells us these 8 U-boats are the southern end of a much larger wolf pack. 23 submarines total. If we eliminate these 8, the entire pack loses confidence. Admiral Dunitz will pull them back. And convoy HX-234, carrying 67 merchant ships with critical war supplies, will reach England safely. No losses." Jackson absorbed this, nodded once. Lieutenant Commander Patrick O'Brien of the USS Sullivan spoke next. He was 32, red-haired Irish, tempered with a grin that could light up a room and a temper that could clear one just as fast. Sullivan had named him commander of the destroyer, bearing Sullivan's own name, specifically because O'Brien was the kind of man Johnny would have liked, would have followed into any fight. "Commander," O'Brien said, and now that Irish grin was spreading across his face, "I think this plan is absolutely insane, completely mad, tactically suicidal." He paused. "And I love it. Those German bastards have been hunting our ships like we're deer in a forest. Time somebody showed them what it feels like to be the prey." O'Brien pulled a photograph from his jacket pocket and laid it on the table. A young woman with red hair and green eyes smiled up from the black and white image. Pretty, no beautiful. The kind of beautiful that made a man want to come home from war. "Margaret Riley," O'Brien said quietly. "We got engaged 3 months ago. Wedding set for June 15th, 54 days from now. She asked me to promise I'd come home for it. Made me swear on my mother's grave." He looked up at Sullivan. "I promised her, sir, so I need to know we're going to survive this, because I intend to keep that promise." Sullivan felt something twist in his chest. 54 days, so close, so terribly close. "Put the photo away, Patrick," he said gently. "You'll see her in June. I'll make sure of it. The last captain was Lieutenant Commander David Martinez, youngest of the group at 29. Commander of the USS Thornton Martinez had graduated top of his class at Annapolis but had seen limited combat action. This was his chance to prove himself, to show he belonged among these veteran officers. Sir Martinez said, his voice steady despite his youth. I've run the calculations. If we can maintain perfect coordination between all 5 ships, if we can spring the trap at exactly the right moment, if our Hedgehog crews are accurate, and if the Germans react exactly as we predict, then yes, this plan can work. But that's a lot of ifs. War is made of ifs, David Sullivan replied. The question is whether we have the skill and courage to turn those ifs into certainties. He stood placing both hands flat on the table, leaning forward so he could look each man in the eye. Gentlemen, I won't lie to you. This is the most dangerous mission any of us will ever undertake. The risk is enormous. The margin for error is razor thin. One mistake, one torpedo that finds its mark, one submarine that gets off a spread before we can kill it, and we could lose ships. We could lose men. Sullivan's voice hardened. But if we succeed, we will have accomplished something no other destroyer squadron in this war has managed. We will have lured a wolf pack into a trap of our own making. We will have turned the hunters into the hunted. And we will have proven that American sailors, American ships, American tactics are superior to anything the German Navy can throw at us. He paused, letting the words sink in. More than that, we will have avenged every Allied sailor who has died in these waters. Every merchant seaman blown apart by a torpedo. Every destroyer crew sent to the bottom. Every convoy that was slaughtered while trying to supply our allies. Sullivan's hand moved unconsciously to his breast pocket where Johnny's dog tags rested. We will have made their deaths mean something. The silence in the wardroom stretched long. Outside, the Atlantic continued its eternal roll. Somewhere out there, 8 German submarines were taking their positions along a patrol line, waiting for prey to wander into their sights. Tomorrow night, that prey would have teeth. Chen spoke first. I'm in, sir. Jackson followed. For my kids, I'm in. O'Brien grinned. For Maggie, and for every ship those U-boats have killed, I'm in. Martinez straightened. I'm in, sir. Sullivan felt the weight lift slightly from his shoulders. Not completely. It would never lift completely until this mission was over. But enough to breathe. All right then, he said. Here's how we're going to do this. For the next 2 hours they planned. They went over every detail of the operation, every contingency, every possible scenario. Sullivan drew on the tactics developed by British Captain Frederick Walker, the Royal Navy's most successful submarine hunter. Walker had pioneered the creeping attack where one ship maintained sonar contact while directing another to close for the kill. Sullivan had refined Walker's concept. Instead of 2 ships, they would use 5. Instead of hunting submarines one at a time, they would trap multiple targets simultaneously. Instead of reacting to submarine attacks, they would force the U-boats to react to them. The key, Sullivan explained, moving pencils across the chart to represent ships, is patience. We broadcast our distress signal starting at 1800 hours tomorrow. We claim to be a damaged tanker with escorts separated from our convoy limping along at 8 knots. The U-boats will detect the transmission and begin converging. He moved 8 pencils inward toward the center of the chart. They'll approach on the surface because it's faster and they can recharge their batteries. They'll maintain radio silence to avoid detection. By 2200 hours, they should all be in position around us, surrounding us, thinking they have us trapped. Sullivan's finger tapped the center of the chart. At 2300 hours exactly, we light them up. Every searchlight, every radar. We illuminate the entire ocean around us like it's daylight. The shock will buy us critical seconds. In those seconds, we engage. Chen leaned forward. Engagement priorities. Each ship is assigned 2 sectors based on compass bearings. Bainbridge takes north and northeast. Harper takes east and southeast. Montgomery takes south and southwest. Sullivan takes west and northwest. Thornton is our mobile reserve, free to engage targets of opportunity or reinforce any ship in trouble. Weapons, Jackson asked. Hedgehog's primary. 1 hit equals 1 kill. We save depth charges for any boat that manages to submerge. The Germans will be expecting depth charges which detonate at preset depths and can miss. They won't be expecting hedgehogs which only explode on contact. Direct contact with their hulls. O'Brien whistled low. 48 projectiles per ship. 5 ships. That's 240 projectiles in the first salvo. Exactly, Sullivan said. If we catch them on the surface, it will be decisive. But these are not rookie commanders we're facing. These are veterans, men who have survived years of combat. They're smart, skilled, and absolutely deadly. We cannot afford to underestimate them. What about their torpedoes? Martinez asked. If they get torpedoes in the water before we spring the trap, we'll have to evade. That's why timing is everything. We need to wait until they're committed to the attack closing for the kill, but before they reach firing position. That window will be narrow, perhaps 5 minutes, maybe less. Sullivan straightened, rolling up the chart. Get back to your ships. Brief your officers, but keep this compartmented. The crews don't need to know the full details until tomorrow afternoon. Let them sleep tonight. They're going to need it. The captains stood gathering their papers and charts. One by one they filed out, leaving Sullivan alone with Reed. Sir, Reed said quietly, do you really think we can pull this off? Sullivan looked at his executive officer for a long moment. Ask me again in 30 hours, Tom, if we're both still alive to talk about it. Reed managed a tight smile. Fair enough, sir. After Reed left, Sullivan remained in the wardroom staring at the chart. 8 red marks, 8 submarines, 396 men, 396 families who would receive telegrams if this worked, 396 mothers who would weep, just like his own mother had wept for Johnny. War was mathematics written in blood. For every life you saved, you had to take others. For every convoy that reached England, safely enemy sailors had to die. There was no clean way through it, no path that didn't leave bodies in your wake. Sullivan thought about the letter in his desk drawer, thought about Sarah reading it if things went wrong tomorrow, thought about never seeing her again, never holding her, never hearing her laugh. He thought about O'Brien's photograph, about Margaret Riley with her red hair and green eyes waiting in Boston for a wedding that might never happen, about Jackson's 3 children who might grow up without a father, about Martinez trying to prove himself at 29, about Chen's hard-earned wisdom that came from understanding exactly how dangerous submarines could be. Good men, all of them, men who trusted him, men who would follow him into tomorrow night's hell because he asked them to. Sullivan pulled Johnny's dog tags from his pocket one more time, held them tight. I'm going to make this count, Johnny, he whispered to the empty room. I'm going to make all of it count. Then he turned off the lights and headed to his cabin. Tomorrow would come whether he was ready or not, whether any of them were ready or not. Tomorrow, 5 American destroyers would sail into the darkness and let death surround them. And when death came knocking, they would answer with fire and steel. April 23rd, 1943, 0600 hours. The morning came cold and gray across the North Atlantic, the kind of dawn that offered no comfort, no warmth, only the promise of another day at sea. Inside the USS Bainbridge, however, something extraordinary was happening in the cramped galley 3 decks below the bridge. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Williams, the ship's head cook, was frying bacon, real bacon, not the salted pork they usually served, not the mystery meat that came in unlabeled cans. Actual honest-to-God American bacon from a pig that had once walked on Iowa farmland. The last of their supply, saved for special occasions. And if today wasn't special, if the morning before you deliberately let enemy submarines surround you wasn't the right time to use up the last of the good food, then when was? The smell filled the galley first. That distinctive aroma of pork fat, rendering of meat, crisping of salt and smoke, and something primal that spoke directly to the hunger center of every man's brain. Then it spread, up through the ventilation shafts, through the passageways, into the berthing compartments where sailors were stirring awake, into every corner of the ship. Men stopped what they were doing, heads turned, noses lifted. Is that, Seaman Second Class Tommy Miller whispered from his bunk, is that bacon? His bunkmate radio man, First Class Jimmy Davis, was already pulling on his dungarees. That's bacon, Tommy boy, real bacon, which means Cookie thinks we might not live through today. Tommy was 19, from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Blonde hair, blue eyes, freckles across his nose that made him look even younger than he was. He had lied about his age to enlist, adding 2 years to make the minimum. His mother still sent him letters every week, written in her careful school teacher's hand, asking when he would come home. He had stopped telling her he didn't know. Now he scrambled down from his bunk following Davis toward the mess deck. Other sailors were emerging from their compartments, drawn by that smell like moths to flame. By the time they reached the serving line, there were 40 men crowded into a space designed for 20. Cookie Williams stood behind the steam table, his white apron already splattered with grease, his dark face split by a grin that showed 3 gold teeth. "Gentlemen," he announced in his deep Alabama drawl, "this morning we feast. Because this morning we are going to do something no destroyer squadron has ever done before. And we are going to do it on full stomachs." He lifted the lid on the warming tray. The bacon was perfect. Crispy at the edges, still tender in the middle, glistening with rendered fat. Strips and strips of it piled high. Beside it, scrambled eggs made from actual eggs, not powder. Toast made from bread Cookie had baked himself yesterday. Real butter, soft and yellow. Tommy took his tray with trembling hands. 2 strips of bacon, a scoop of eggs, 1 piece of toast. He found a seat at one of the long metal tables and just stared at his plate for a moment. "You gonna eat that or marry it?" Davis asked, sliding in beside him. Tommy picked up his fork, cut a piece of bacon, raised it to his mouth. The first bite exploded across his tongue. Salt and smoke and fat and something he couldn't quite name but recognized instantly as home, as his mother's kitchen on Sunday mornings. As his father coming in from the barn, stamping snow off his boots, calling out, "Something smells good in here," as his little sister stealing bacon from the platter when she thought no one was looking. Tommy closed his eyes. "Tastes like home," he whispered. Davis punched his shoulder gently. The radio man was 26 from Baltimore, with dark hair and darker eyes that had seen things done, things, new things that made him seem older than his years. He had been at sea when the war started, had watched ships burn, had pulled in men from water so cold it killed them before they could drown. "Don't talk like that, kid," Davis said quietly. "Don't you dare talk like that. We're all coming home, all of us. You hear me?" Tommy nodded, not trusting his voice. He took another bite of bacon, then another. The eggs were good, too, better than anything they had eaten in weeks. The toast was warm, the butter melting into it. Around them, the mess deck had gone quiet. 40 sailors eating breakfast, and not one of them was talking. They were too busy tasting home, too busy remembering what they were fighting for, too busy storing up this moment, this meal, this last piece of normalcy before they sailed into whatever hell waited for them tonight. Cookie Williams watched from his galley, his gold teeth hidden, now his face serious. He had served in the First War, had been at Belleau Wood with the Marines before transferring to the Navy. He knew what it meant when men ate in silence like this, knew what it meant when they savored every bite like it might be their last, because it might be. "More bacon," he called out, and 20 hands shot up. Tommy finished his plate and went back for seconds. This time he ate slower, paying attention to every detail. The texture of the meat, the way the fat dissolved on his tongue, the slight char on the edges that added bitterness to balance the salt. The way the eggs mixed with the bacon grease, creating something greater than either ingredient alone. "My mom makes bacon every Sunday," Tommy said, speaking to his plate more than to Davis. "After church, we come home and the whole house smells like this. My little sister Katie, she's 13 now, she always tries to sneak pieces before Ma gets it to the table." He smiled at the memory. "Last time I was home on leave, Katie had grown 4 inches, taller than Ma now. She asked me when I was coming back. I told her soon. I told her I'd be home for Christmas." Davis said nothing. What could he say? Christmas was 8 months away. Tonight they would face 8 submarines. The odds of everyone at this table seeing Christmas were not good. Instead, Davis pulled a photograph from his shirt pocket. A woman pretty with dark curls and a bright smile. 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 7 and 5 years old. "My wife Helen," Davis said. "Kids are Michael and Sarah. Haven't seen them in 11 months. Michael writes me letters. Can't spell for nothing, but he tries. Last letter said he wanted to be a sailor like his daddy." Davis tucked the photo away. After tonight, maybe he'll change his mind. Tommy looked at his friend, really looked at him, saw the lines around his eyes, the gray starting at his temples, the way his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was watching. "We're going to make it, Jimmy," Tommy said, and he surprised himself by believing it. "We're going to live through this. You're going to see Helen and Michael and Sarah. I'm going to see Ma and Katie. We're all going to sit around a dinner table someday, and tell stories about the time we let 8 U-boats surround us and they killed every single one of them. Davis smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. From your mouth to God's ears, kid. 3 hours later, Commander Sullivan stood in Admiral Jonas Richardson's office in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The Admiral's quarters were spacious by naval standards, with real furniture, instead of folding metal chairs, actual paintings on the walls instead of charts and windows that looked out over the harbor where dozens of ships lay at anchor. Richardson himself was 62, white-haired, with a face carved from granite by 4 decades at sea. He had commanded destroyers in the First World War, had seen what torpedoes could do to steel hulls, had written letters to too many widows, telling them their husbands died, bravely died for their country, died for something that mattered. He did not want to write any more letters. "Sit down, Commander," Richardson said, gesturing to a chair. His voice was rough, worn smooth by years of shouting orders over wind and engines. "I assume you've briefed your captains?" "Yes, sir. They understand the mission. They're ready." Richardson studied Sullivan for a long moment, taking his measure, weighing the man against the task. "Are you ready, Commander? Because once you sail out of this harbor, there's no calling this off. No changing your mind halfway through. You will position your squadron exactly where intelligence says those U-boats are waiting. You will broadcast that you're a crippled tanker, and you will wait while death circles you in the dark." Sullivan met his gaze without flinching. "I'm ready, sir. You understand the risks. If those submarines detect your destroyers before you spring the trap, they'll scatter. You'll be lucky to get one or two. The rest will escape and report what happened. Our intelligence advantage, everything we've gained from breaking their codes, could be compromised." "I understand, sir." "And if they get torpedoes in the water before you can engage," Richardson continued, "if even one torpedo finds its mark, you could lose a ship, lose 200 men, destroy 5 of our most modern destroyers for the sake of 8 U-boats we might not even sink." "I understand that too, sir." Richardson leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the armrest. "Why did you volunteer for this Sullivan truth now? No speeches about duty or honor. Why did you raise your hand when every other squadron commander in the Atlantic Fleet had the good sense to keep theirs down?" Sullivan reached into his breast pocket, pulled out the dog tags, laid them on Richardson's desk. "My brother, sir, USS Arizona, December 7th, 1941. The Admiral picked up the tags, read the name, set them down gently like they were made of glass. "I'm sorry for your loss, Commander, but revenge is a poor reason to risk 5 ships and 1,000 men." "It's not revenge, sir." Sullivan's voice was quiet but steady. "It's mathematics. Those 8 U-boats, if we let them operate, will sink dozens of merchant ships over the next 6 months. Thousands of tons of supplies will go to the bottom. Hundreds of merchant sailors will die. The war will last longer. More men like my brother will be killed." He picked up the dog tags, held them in his palm. "But if we eliminate those 8 boats now, those merchant ships live. Those supplies reach England. The war ends sooner. Fewer men die. That's not revenge, Admiral. That's arithmetic." Richardson was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Your squadron leaves at 1400 hours. The U-boats are positioned along this line." He unrolled a chart across his desk, red marks showing enemy positions. "You'll reach the center of their patrol area by 1800 hours. That's when you start broadcasting your distress signal." "Yes, sir." "Commander Sullivan." Richardson stood, extending his hand. "Bring your men home, every single one of them. That's not a request, that's an order." Sullivan shook his hand. "I'll do my best, sir." "Your best had better be enough." Back aboard the Bainbridge, the crew was making final preparations. In the forward magazine, torpedomen were checking warheads. In the sonar room, technicians were calibrating equipment. On the bridge, quartermasters were updating charts with the latest weather information. And in his cabin on the USS Sullivan, Lieutenant Commander Patrick O'Brien was looking at a photograph. Margaret Riley smiled up at him from the black and white image. The photo had been taken at a dance in Boston 6 months ago. She wore a dark dress that showed her shoulders. Her red hair was pinned up. Her green eyes sparkled with laughter at something O'Brien had just said, some joke now lost to time. He remembered that night, remembered how she felt in his arms as they danced, remembered the smell of her perfume, something floral he could never quite identify. Remembered how she looked at him when he told her he had to ship out again, The way her smile had faltered for just a moment before she straightened and said, "Then you'll just have to come back to me, won't you?" 3 months later, he had come back, had gone down on one knee in her parents' parlor, his dress uniform pressed sharp, his hands shaking as he opened the ring box. She said yes before he could finish the question. The wedding was set for June 15th. 53 days from now, everything was planned. The church, the flowers, the reception. Margaret's dress was being altered. Her mother was addressing invitations. His best man, his brother Sean, was taking leave from his army unit to be there. 53 days. O'Brien pulled out his fountain pen and a piece of paper. He had written Margaret yesterday and the day before that and the day before that. He wrote her every day. Sometimes long letters, sometimes just a few lines, just so she would know he was thinking of her. Today's letter would be short. "My darling Maggie," he wrote, "tonight we do something dangerous. I can't tell you the details, but you know I wouldn't take unnecessary risks. This is necessary. This matters. When it's over, I'll write you a long letter and tell you everything. But for now, I just want you to know that I love you, that I think about you every moment, that I keep your picture right over my heart, and that nothing, not the German Navy, not the Atlantic Ocean, not all the U-boats in the Kriegsmarine will stop me from seeing you walk down that aisle in 53 days. I promise. All my love, Patrick." He folded the letter, sealed it, wrote her address on the envelope. Then he tucked it into his jacket pocket right beside the photograph. Both over his heart, both keeping him safe. O'Brien didn't believe in luck, didn't believe in superstition, but he believed in love, believed it was a kind of armor, believed that a man was something to live for, something to fight for, something to come home to, was harder to kill than a man with nothing. Tonight he would need that armor. He checked his watch, 13:30 hours, 30 minutes until they sailed. He stood straightened, his uniform touched the photograph one more time through the fabric of his jacket. "See you in June, Maggie," he whispered. On the Bainbridge's fantail, Sullivan stood with Reed watching the harbor. Sailors were making final preparations. Lines were being singled up. The engineering crew was bringing the boilers to full pressure. Black smoke rose from the funnel, drifting across the gray Halifax sky. "Sir," Reed said quietly, "I've been thinking about something Cookie said this morning. When he served up that bacon. He said this morning we feast because we're going to do something no destroyer squadron has ever done. And I'm wondering if maybe there's a reason no destroyer squadron has ever done it. Because it's insane." Sullivan smiled grimly. "Probably, Tom. Probably, Bob. But we're doing it anyway. We're doing it anyway." Reed was quiet for a moment, then, "Sir, if something happens to you tonight, if you don't make it back, I want you to know it's been an honor serving with you. Best captain I've ever had." Sullivan turned to look at his executive officer, saw the fear there, the determination, the loyalty. "Nothing's going to happen to me, Tom, or to you, or to any of our boys. We're going to sink 8 submarines, save a convoy, and be back in Halifax in 3 days drinking whiskey and telling war stories." "That's an order." Reed managed a smile. "Aye, aye, sir. I'll hold you to that whiskey." At exactly 1400 hours, the USS Bainbridge cast off her lines and began moving slowly away from the dock. Behind her, the other 4 destroyers of Squadron 18 followed in neat succession: Harper, Montgomery, Sullivan, Thornton. 5 gray ships on a gray ocean under a gray sky. And on the dock, a small crowd had gathered to watch them leave. Mostly dock workers, a few civilians, some officers from other ships. They didn't cheer, didn't wave, just watched in silence as the destroyers made their way toward the harbor entrance. Something about those 5 ships moving in perfect line ahead, formation their bows cutting through the calm harbor water, their battle flags flying, spoke of purpose, of determination, of men going to do something difficult and dangerous because someone had to do it. Sullivan stood on his bridge wing watching Halifax recede behind them. Somewhere in that city, Admiral Richardson was watching through binoculars from his office window, watching 5 ships sail toward a battle that would either prove his faith in them or end with him writing letters to their families. The Bainbridge cleared the harbor entrance and turned northeast toward the open Atlantic. Behind her, the other 4 destroyers took their positions, spreading out into a screening formation. 5 ships alone on an empty ocean. Sullivan pulled Johnny's dog tags from his pocket one more time. The metal was warm from his body heat. He held them tight, feeling their weight, their reality. "Tonight, brother," he said to the wind, "tonight we settle accounts." Then he tucked the tags away and went back to his bridge. There was work to do, charts to study, orders to give, a trap to set. And in 8 hours when darkness fell and the U-boats came hunting, they would be ready. 2,200 hours. Full darkness had fallen over the North Atlantic like a shroud, the kind of darkness that existed nowhere else on Earth. No city lights, no stars through the overcast, no moon, just black water meeting black sky at a horizon that ceased to exist. On the bridge of the USS Bainbridge, Commander Sullivan stood perfectly still, his hands gripped on the bridge wing railing. His eyes had adjusted to the darkness as much as they ever would, which meant he could see perhaps 50 yards of ocean, maybe less. The Bainbridge's bow rose and fell with the swells, each wave a 6-foot wall of water that lifted the destroyer and set her down again with mechanical regularity. The ship was blacked out completely, every light extinguished, every porthole covered. They moved through the darkness like a ghost ship, visible only as a slightly darker shape against the dark water, and only then if you knew exactly where to look. Sullivan inhaled deeply through his nose, and there it was, diesel fuel. That distinctive petroleum smell, sharp and chemical, cutting through the salt air and iodine tang of the ocean. It was faint, so faint most men would never notice it. But Sullivan had spent 20 years at sea. His nose knew things his eyes and ears could never tell him. The U-boats were close. "Tom," he said quietly to Reed, who stood beside him. "Do you smell that?" Reed lifted his face to the wind nostrils flaring. After a moment he nodded. "Diesel exhaust. Coming from the northwest, I think. Maybe 2 miles out. Closer than that. The wind's carrying it. 1 mile. Perhaps less." Reed's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "How many?" "At least 3 boats, maybe more. They're running on the surface, charging batteries, making better speed to their attack positions." Below them in the chart room, the radar operator's voice crackled over the intercom. "Bridge radar, multiple surface contacts. Bearing 315 range 22,000 yards. Count 2, possibly 3 targets. Speed approximately 15 knots. Closing." Sullivan keyed the intercom. "Acknowledged. Continue tracking. Report any new contacts immediately." He turned to Reed. "Pass to all ships by signal lamp. Enemy in sight. Hold formation. Hold fire until my command." Reed moved to the signal lamp, his fingers working the shutter in quick, precise patterns. Across the dark water, the other 4 destroyers acknowledged with brief flashes. Everyone was seeing the same thing now. The trap was closing. The hunters were circling. And the bait sat perfectly still, apparently oblivious to the death converging from all directions. In the sonar room, 3 decks below, Chief Petty Officer Mike Anderson pressed his headphones tight against his ears, listening to the sounds of the sea. Anderson was 43, with gray in his hair and a face weathered by sun and salt. He had been a sonar operator since 1925, back when the technology was new and unreliable. 18 years of listening to the ocean had taught him things no manual could explain. How to distinguish a whale from a submarine. How to hear the difference between diesel engines and electric motors. How to count propeller blades by their acoustic signature. Now he heard something that made his blood run cold. Sonar contact bearing 320 range 18,000 yards. He called out, his voice professionally calm, despite what his equipment was telling him. "Single-screw diesel engine, designated contact Sierra 1. He adjusted his controls, sweeping his beam across the darkness. "Second contact bearing 085, range 16,000 yards. Also diesel, designated Sierra 2. Sweep again. Listen, count the throbs, calculate the bearing rate. Third contact bearing 170, range 19,000 yards. Sierra 3. The sonar operator beside him, a young seaman named Roberts, watched the oscilloscope with wide eyes. "Chief," Roberts whispered, "how many are out there?" Anderson didn't answer immediately. He was listening, counting, his trained ear picking out individual engine signatures from the background noise of the ocean. Each U-boat had a slightly different acoustic profile, different engine types, different propeller designs, different mechanical flaws that created unique sound patterns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sir, Anderson said into his microphone, his voice finally betraying a hint of emotion. "We're being surrounded. I count at least 6 distinct diesel signatures. possibly more. They're closing from multiple directions. On the bridge, Sullivan absorbed this information without changing expression. 6 submarines confirmed. Intelligence had said 8. 2 more were out there somewhere running silent or too far away for sonar detection. Or perhaps already in position, their diesel engines shut down, drifting on the current and waiting. Very well, Sullivan said calmly. Maintain contact on all targets. I want bearing and range updates every 2 minutes. He checked his watch. 15 hours. 45 minutes until they sprang the trap. 45 minutes of sitting here letting the U-boats get closer, letting them think they had the advantage. 45 minutes that would feel like 45 hours. Tom, Sullivan said quietly, I think now would be a good time to say a prayer. Reed nodded. I've been praying since we left Halifax, sir. Then pray harder. 8 miles to the northwest, cutting through the same dark water, at 15 knots, Kapitänleutnant Klaus Hartmann stood in the conning tower of U-309 binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the horizon for any sign of the target. The wind was cold on his face, carrying spray from the bow wave. Below his feet, the submarine's twin diesel engines hammered away, driving the boat forward, recharging the massive battery banks that powered the electric motors. Hartmann was 34 years old, lean, hard, with pale blue eyes that seemed to see through darkness and a face carved into permanent angles by 3 years of war. He had commanded U-309 for 18 months, had sailed 8 patrols, had sunk 12 Allied ships totaling 47,000 tons. He wore the Iron Cross First Class. His crew called him the Wolf because of how he hunted. Patient, relentless, always attacking from the direction his prey least expected. Tonight would be his 13th kill. An unlucky number for superstitious men, but Hartmann had no use for superstition. He believed in diesel engines and electric motors, in torpedo spreads and firing solutions, in mathematics and physics and the simple fact that a well-placed torpedo could sink anything that floated. Kapitan, his radio operator called from below. BDU acknowledges our position report. We are authorized to attack upon contact confirmation. Excellent, Hartmann said. He lowered his binoculars and studied the tactical situation. According to the distress signal they had been intercepting since 1800 hours, the target was a merchant tanker damaged and slow with a small escort group. Perfect prey, vulnerable, valuable, the kind of target that made careers and made widows. Hartmann had stopped thinking about that part 2 years ago. In the beginning, he had imagined the men on the ships he sank, imagined them scrambling for lifeboats as the water rushed in, imagined them burning in oil fires or drowning in the cold Atlantic, or dying of exposure in lifeboats that would never be found. Imagine their families receiving telegrams, wives, mothers, children. But if you thought about that too much, you couldn't do the job, couldn't function, couldn't wage war. So Hartmann had learned to stop imagining, had learned to see enemy ships as targets, nothing more. Numbers on a chart, tonnage to be subtracted from the Allied merchant fleet. It was easier that way. Georg, he called down the hatch. What's our range to the target, radio man? Georg Muller looked up from his station, his young face illuminated by the green glow of his equipment. Muller was 23, fresh-faced, with dark hair and darker eyes that still held innocence, despite everything he had seen. Kapitan, based on their last transmission and our current speed, I estimate we will reach attack position in approximately 90 minutes, 23:30 hours. Very good. Continue monitoring their signals. I want to know immediately if they change course or speed. Jawohl, Herr Kapitän. Mullström. Muller bent back to his work, adjusting dials, fine-tuning frequencies. In the cramped confines of a Type 7 U-boat, every man's station was within arm's reach of another man's. 52 men lived in a steel tube 220 feet long and 20 feet wide. They ate together, slept in shifts, breathed the same recycled air, shared the same dangers. They were not just crewmates, they were brothers. Muller reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph, holding it carefully so it wouldn't get wet from the condensation that covered every surface inside the boat. A young woman smiled up at him from the black and white image, pretty with light-colored hair and bright eyes. In her arms, she held an infant, perhaps 3 months old, wrapped in a white blanket. His wife Hilda, his daughter Greta. He had never met Greta. She had been born while he was at sea on his previous patrol. By the time U-309 returned to port for resupply, he had only 48 hours of leave. Not enough time to travel from France back to Hamburg. Not enough time to hold his daughter. Not enough time to be a father. So Hilda had sent him photographs, had written him letters describing every detail. How Greta had her father's dark eyes. How she slept through the night already. How she smiled when Hilda sang to her. How she reached for things with her tiny hands as if trying to grasp the whole world. After this patrol, Mueller whispered to the photograph, "I'll request extended leave. I'll go home. I'll finally meet you, my little one. I'll hold you. I'll sing to you. I'll be the father you deserve." He kissed the photograph gently and tucked it back into his pocket. 8 patrols. That was the requirement for extended leave. After 8 successful patrols, you could request to go home for a month. Mueller had completed 7. Tonight would be his 8th. After tonight, he would be going home. Would finally become a real father instead of just a name and letters. After tonight. "Georg," the torpedo officer called, "check the connections on tube 3. I'm getting an intermittent signal." Mueller stood moving forward through the narrow passageway toward the torpedo room. As he passed other crewmen, they nodded to him. Young men, most of them. Boys, really. The oldest man on the boat besides Hartman was 30. The youngest was 18, average age was 22. They looked up to Mueller because he was married, had a family, had something waiting for him beyond the war. In a strange way, his photograph of Hilda and Greta gave the whole crew hope, proof that normal life still existed somewhere, that they might return to it someday, if they survived. Mueller knelt beside torpedo tube 3, checking the electrical connections. Everything seemed fine, probably just moisture causing intermittent contact. He wiped down the connections with a dry cloth, tested them, gave the torpedo officer a thumbs up. "All good," he reported. The torpedo officer grinned. "When we sink this tanker, I'm buying you a drink in port. Champagne, the good stuff. Save your money, Dieter. I'll be on a train to Hamburg before you can finish that bottle. Home to see that pretty wife and new daughter. Home to meet my daughter for the first time." Dieter's grin faded slightly. "I hope you make it, Georg. I really do." Mueller climbed back to his radio station, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. There was something in Dieter's voice, something that sounded too much like goodbye. He shook it off. Nerves, that was all. Every patrol felt dangerous. Every attack carried risk. But they had done this dozens of times before. Would do it dozens of times more. U-309 was a lucky boat. The Wolf was a lucky captain. They would sink this tanker, return to port, and Mueller would board that train to Hamburg. He would hold his daughter. He would. On the Bainbridge, Sullivan watched the seconds tick past on his watch. 22:30 hours. 30 minutes until execution. The diesel smell was stronger now. Multiple sources. The U-boats were converging exactly as predicted, drawn by the distress signal like sharks to blood in the water. "Sir," the radar operator called, "new contact. Bearing 050, range 24,000 yards. Designated contact 4. She's closing fast." Acknowledged. Another contact bearing 270, range 20,000 yards. Contact 5. Acknowledged. Reed appeared at Sullivan's elbow. "That's 5 confirmed by radar, at least 6 by sonar. They're all around us now." Sullivan nodded slowly. The trap was closing perfectly. Too perfectly. Every tactical instinct he possessed was screaming at him to increase speed, to turn away, to run. 5 destroyers surrounded by 6 or more submarines was a nightmare scenario. If even 2 of those U-boats got torpedoes in the water, if even one torpedo found its mark, they could lose a ship, could lose 200 men, could lose everything. But if they ran now, the submarines would scatter, would report the encounter, would compromise the entire operation. And convoy HX-234, with its 67 merchant ships and 3,000 sailors, would sail directly into the jaws of 23 U-boats. The mathematics was brutal, but clear. Risk 5 ships and 1,000 men now, or guarantee the loss of dozens of ships and thousands of men later. There was only one correct answer. "Steady as she goes," Sullivan said quietly. "All stations maintain readiness. Weapons tight until my command." In the forward magazine of the USS Harper, Lieutenant Commander Chen's ship, the Hedgehog crew was making final preparations. The Hedgehog was a relatively new weapon mounted on the foredeck, consisting of 24 spigots arranged in a circle. Each spigot held a projectile 65 pounds of high explosive in a teardrop-shaped casing. When fired, all 24 projectiles would arc through the air in an elliptical pattern, splashing into the water ahead of the ship. The genius of the Hedgehog was its fuse. Unlike depth charges, which exploded at preset depths, whether they hit anything or not, Hedgehog projectiles only detonated on contact with a solid object. Contact with a submarine hull meant instant detonation. A miss meant the projectile sank harmlessly to the bottom, which meant a Hedgehog explosion always meant a hit. Gunner's mate first class William Bull Henderson supervised the loading of the spigots, checking each projectile personally. Bull was 6'3", 240 pounds of Alabama farm boy muscle. His hands were so large, he could palm a Hedgehog projectile like a baseball. But those massive hands worked with surprising delicacy as he checked fuses, verified connections, ensured everything was perfect. "These fish better work," his assistant, a skinny kid from New Jersey named Kowalski, muttered nervously. "If they don't work, we're dead." Bull fixed him with a steady gaze. "They'll work, Ski. I checked every single one personally. 24 projectiles. 24 chances to send a U-boat to hell. And if that ain't enough, we got 24 more ready to reload." "How long to reload?" "Under combat conditions, 3 minutes if we're fast, 4 if we're careful. And if the submarine fires torpedoes at us while we're reloading." Bull's smile was grim. "Then we better hope the captain's evasive maneuvers are as good as everyone says they are." Kowalski swallowed hard. "I got a girl back home, Bull. Promised her I'd come back. Promised I'd marry her." "Then you better make sure these Hedgehogs count, kid, because the only way we're getting home is by killing every U-boat that shows its face tonight." On the bridge wing of the USS Sullivan, Lieutenant Commander O'Brien stood with his executive officer, both men scanning the darkness with night vision binoculars. The binoculars were a new technology using ambient light amplification to turn near total darkness into ghostly green visibility. Through them, O'Brien could see the other destroyers of the squadron, dark shapes against darker water. He could also see something else. "XO," he said quietly. "Bearing 2885. Range approximately 3,000 yards. Do you see it?" His executive officer swung his binoculars to the indicated bearing. After a moment, "I see it. Looks like a conning tower. U-boat running on the surface." "That's what I thought." O'Brien lowered his binoculars, his heart hammering against his ribs. 3,000 yards. Less than 2 miles. The U-boat was close. Dangerously close. If they had detection equipment as good as the Americans, they would realize any moment that their targets were not merchants, but destroyers. O'Brien's hand moved unconsciously to his jacket pocket, touching the photograph there. Maggie's face, her smile, her eyes. 53 days until the wedding. "Steady," he murmured, not sure if he was talking to his crew or to himself. "Steady. Hold formation. Hold fire. Just a little longer." The U-boat continued its approach, unaware that 5 destroyers were tracking its every move. Unaware that 52 men aboard that submarine had perhaps 30 minutes to live. Unaware that the hunters had become the hunted. On the Bainbridge, Anderson's voice came over the intercom again, tension finally creeping into his professional calm. "Bridge sonar. Contact Sierra 6 has closed to 15,000 yards. Contact Sierra 1 is now at 12,000 yards. Sir, they're inside torpedo range. If they fire now, we won't have much time to evade." Sullivan keyed the intercom. "Understood, Chief. Maintain contact. Call out any bearing changes immediately." He turned to read. "Signal all ships. Prepare for action. Full crew to battle stations. But maintain blackout. No lights, no radar emissions, nothing that could alert them." Within seconds, the Bainbridge transformed. Men raced to their stations. Gun crews manned their mounts. Torpedomen stood ready at their tubes. In the engine room, the chief engineer brought all 4 boilers to maximum pressure, ready to give the ship everything she had when the order came. On every destroyer in the squadron, the same transformation was taking place. 1,000 men at battle stations, 5 ships ready to spring the trap, 5 captains waiting for Sullivan's command, 22 45 hours, 15 minutes until execution. The U-boats were at optimal range now. Close enough that the Hedgehogs would be devastatingly effective. Far enough that the submarines couldn't yet identify their targets clearly. Sullivan pulled Johnny's dog tags from his pocket one last time, held them tight, whispered a prayer for all the men about to die, American and German alike. Then he put the tags away and keyed his microphone. All ships, this is Bainbridge, actual. Stand by for execute order. On my command and not before. Hold steady, hold true. 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes felt like 3 hours, like 3 years, like eternity compressed into 180 seconds of darkness and diesel fumes and the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. 179. 178. Somewhere out there in the darkness, Georg Mueller was thinking about his daughter Greta, imagining the moment he would finally hold her, finally be the father she deserved. He would never get that chance. 150. Klaus Hartmann was calculating firing solutions, planning his attack, confident in his abilities and his boat and his destiny as one of Germany's premier submarine commanders. His confidence would die with him in approximately 12 minutes. 120. On 5 American destroyers, 1,000 men stood ready, young men, old men, men with families, men with nothing, men who had volunteered for this mission knowing it might kill them, men who would do it anyway because someone had to, because this was war. 90, 60, 30. Sullivan's hand moved to the signal lamp control. 15, 10, 5, 0. All ships, Sullivan's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. This is execute order. Lights on, full power, engage at will. And suddenly, impossibly beautifully, the night turned into day. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. 5 destroyers, dark shapes lurking in darker water, just seconds before exploded into brilliant white light. Every searchlight activated simultaneously. Carbon arc lamps mounted on masts and superstructures blazed to life with 50 million candle power, each turning night into artificial noon. The beams swept across the ocean surface, painting the black Atlantic silver, catching wave tops and spray, illuminating everything within a mile in every direction, and catching 8 German U-boats completely by surprise. On U-309's conning tower, Captain Lieutenant Hartmann had perhaps 2 seconds to process what was happening. One moment, he was peering through binoculars at dark shapes he assumed were merchant vessels. The next moment, those shapes erupted with light so bright it burned his retinas even through closed eyelids. "Destroyers!" he screamed into the voice tube, his night vision destroyed spots dancing in front of his eyes. "It's a trap. Emergency dive. Get us down now." Below in U-309's control room, the diving klaxon sounded its 2-tone wail. Men leaped to their stations. The chief engineer opened the vents on the ballast tanks. High-pressure air hissed as it escaped. Water rushed in to replace it. The bow began to tilt downward, but they were too slow. On the USS Bainbridge, Sullivan stood at his battle station on the bridge wing, one hand on the railing, the other holding binoculars to his eyes. Through the lenses, he could see U-309 clearly. Now her gray hull stark against the illuminated water. Her conning tower silhouetted men scrambling to get below as the submarine began her emergency dive. "Target bearing 012. The fire control officer's voice crackled over the speaker. "Range 8,000 yards. Target is diving. Solution set." "Hedgehog," Sullivan commanded, his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Fire." With a series of sharp cracks, 24 Hedgehog projectiles launched from the spigots on Bainbridge's foredeck. They arced through the night air in a perfect elliptical pattern, trailing smoke, looking for all the world like fireworks at a 4th of July celebration. Then they splashed into the water ahead of U-309, disappearing beneath the surface. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. In U-309's control room, Georg Mueller clung to his radio console as the deck tilted to a 30-degree down angle. Water was pouring in through the open conning tower hatch. The chief was yelling something about trim. The diving planes were at maximum down angle. They were plunging towards safety, toward the depths where the destroyers couldn't follow. They were going to make it. Then 7 Hedgehog projectiles struck U-309's pressure hull simultaneously. The detonations were catastrophic. Each 65-pound warhead contained high explosive designed specifically to penetrate submarine hulls. The explosions tore through the steel plating like paper. The pressure hull collapsed inward. Internal bulkheads buckled and failed. The forward torpedo room flooded instantly, drowning the men there, before they could scream. The control room was next. One explosion ruptured the hull directly below the radio station where Muller stood. The sea rushed in under tremendous pressure, a solid wall of water moving at hundreds of miles per hour. It struck Muller like a freight train, crushing his rib cage, rupturing his lungs, breaking his spine in 3 places. His last thought in the fraction of a second before his brain ceased to function was of Greta, of the daughter he would never meet, of the train to Hamburg he would never board, of the future that died with him in the cold Atlantic dark. 309's bow plunged downward at an impossible angle. Her stern lifted out of the water for a moment, propellers still turning uselessly before she slid beneath the surface. Internal explosions ripped through her hull as compressed air tanks ruptured and torpedoes cooked off from the heat and pressure. She plummeted toward the ocean floor 3 miles below her, hull breaking apart as she fell, scattering wreckage and bodies across the deep. 52 men died in less than 10 seconds. On Bainbridge's bridge, the sonar operator's voice came over the speaker, professionally calm, despite what he was reporting. Multiple detonations, breakup noises. Contact Sierra 1 is gone, sir. She's going down. Sullivan felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a cold acceptance of the mathematics. 52 German sailors dead. Convoy HX-234 that much safer. The arithmetic of war. But there was no time to reflect. 7 more submarines were out there, and now they knew this was a fight for survival. Helm Sullivan ordered, "Come right to bearing 050, all ahead full. Next target." On the USS Harper, Lieutenant Commander Chen was tracking U-417. The German submarine was closer than U-309 had been, only 5,000 yards, and her commander had reacted faster. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Schneider had the presence of mind to order his deck, gun manned even as he began his crash dive, hoping to fight his way out of the trap. Chen wasn't going to give him the chance. "Forward 5-inch mounts," he called to his gunnery officer. "Rapid fire. Target the conning tower." "Hedgehog crew fire, when ready." Harper's 2 forward 5-inch guns spoke almost simultaneously, their muzzles spitting flame. The first salvo fell short, sending up geysers of white water that bracketed the submarine. Chen watched the fall of shot, made a mental calculation, adjusted the firing solution. Up 200, fire. The second salvo screamed across the intervening water. One shell struck the ocean 20 yards from U-417's hull. The other hit the conning tower dead center. The high explosive shell penetrated the thin armor and detonated inside the confined space. Everyone on the bridge died instantly. The blast shredded the periscopes, destroyed the navigation equipment, and blew out the pressure seals on the conning tower hatch. Water began pouring into the submarine, even as she tried to dive. Schneider, standing at the base of the conning tower ladder, looked up and saw the ocean falling on him. He opened his mouth to scream an order, any order, but water filled his lungs before he could speak. He drowned inside his own command 10 feet below the surface of the Atlantic. Harper's Hedgehog fired a moment later. 18 of the 24 projectiles found their mark. U-417 didn't just sink. She disintegrated. The multiple explosions tore her into 3 large pieces and countless smaller fragments. Her bow section, still full of unexpended torpedoes, hit the bottom first. The stern, driven by the still turning propellers, spiraled down separately. The middle section, crushed by the pressure, imploded halfway to the bottom. There were no survivors. 2 down, Chen said quietly to his executive officer. 6 to go. On the USS Montgomery, Lieutenant Commander Jackson was facing a different problem. He had 2 U-boats in his sector, U-521 and U-608, and they were close together, approaching in a coordinated attack. The submarines were less than 1,000 yards apart, clearly communicating, somehow planning to hit Montgomery from 2 directions simultaneously. Jackson made a split-second decision. "All guns," he ordered, "commence firing. Alternate salvos between targets. Hedgehog crew load double pattern. We're taking both of them." Montgomery's 5-inch guns began firing in a steady drumbeat, shells arcing toward both submarines. The gunners were good, experienced, and they had perfect visibility now, with the searchlights illuminating their targets. Shells began falling all around both U-boats. U-608, the northern boat, took 3 direct hits in rapid succession. One shell struck her forward deck, blowing a hole in the pressure hull. Another hit the base of the conning tower, killing everyone topside. The third penetrated the diesel engine room, setting the fuel tanks on fire. Flames erupted from U-608's hull orange and yellow against the silver water silhouetting the submarine. Her commander, Captain, Lieutenant Franz Weber, saw his boat was doomed. He made the hardest decision a submarine captain could make. "Abandon ship," he shouted down the voice tube. "All hands topside, we're abandoning ship." The crew of U-608 poured from the hatches, German sailors jumping into the 40-degree water, inflating life vests, launching the single life raft they could reach. Weber was the last man off, following the naval tradition that the captain leaves last. He stood on the burning hull for a moment, watching his boat settle by the stern, then jumped. U-608 slipped beneath the waves. 30 seconds later, her bow lifting high before she plunged downward. 17 men survived her sinking, bobbing in their life vests, watching the battle continue around them. But U-521 was a different story. Her commander, Kapitän Leutnant Dieter Kraus, was one of Germany's most experienced submarine captains. 12 years in the Kriegsmarine, 9 war patrols, 15 Allied ships sunk. He had survived attacks before, had evaded depth charges, had outlasted destroyer hunting groups. He wasn't going to die tonight. "Emergency dive," he ordered calmly. "Maximum down angle. Take us to 300 feet, silent running. Cut all motors except life support." U-521 slipped beneath the surface just as Montgomery's Hedgehog salvo splashed into the water where she had been. The projectiles sank through empty ocean, missing their target. Jackson cursed under his breath. "Sonar, find me that boat. Don't let her get away." In Montgomery's sonar room, Chief Sonarman Anderson's counterpart, a veteran operator named Williams, was already on it. He adjusted his equipment, compensating for the noise of nearby ships, in gunfire filtering out everything except the distinctive sound of a submarine's electric motors. "Contact," Williams called out after a moment. "Bearing 270, range 1,200 yards, depth 200 feet. Target is turning to port, increasing speed." Jackson smiled grimly. Kraus was good, but he wasn't good enough to escape. "Helm come left to 270, reduce speed to 5 knots. We're going to creep up on this one." He keyed his radio. "Thornton, this is Montgomery. I need your help with this fish. Coordinate creeping attack on my mark." On the USM, Thornton Lieutenant Commander Martinez received the call with a surge of excitement. This was his chance, his moment to prove he belonged among these veteran captains. "Montgomery, Thornton. Copy. Standing by for coordinates." Jackson and Martinez coordinated their approach with hand signals via signal lamp, 2 destroyers moving into position on opposite sides of the submerged U-521, boxing her in. The German submarine twisted and turned below them, trying to evade, but the American sonar operators tracked every move. "Steady as she goes," Jackson called to his helmsman. "Nice and slow. We want perfect contact." At 800 yards range with flawless sonar tracking, Jackson gave the order. "Hedgehog fire." Montgomery's Hedgehog launched its deadly pattern. 2 seconds later, Thornton's Hedgehog fired from the opposite direction. 48 projectiles entering the water from different angles, creating an inescapable pattern. Below in U-521's control room, Kraus heard the splashes through his hull. He knew what was coming, knew there was no escape now. He had 1 second to feel regret for all the things he would never do, all the life he would never live, all the victories he would never claim. Then 12 Hedgehog projectiles struck U-521 simultaneously. The explosions crushed her pressure hull like an aluminum can. Internal bulkheads collapsed. Compartments flooded. Men died from the shock wave alone, their internal organs ruptured by the sudden pressure changes. The submarine's spine broke in 2 places. She plummeted toward the bottom in pieces, trailing debris and oil. Kraus died at his command station, his hands still on the periscope controls, his mind still calculating tactics that would never matter. His body would never be recovered. U-521 would be his tomb, 3 miles down in the eternal darkness. "Contact lost," Williams reported. "Multiple breakup noises. She's gone, sir." Jackson nodded. 3 down, 5 to go. Rescue detail to the fantail. Pick up those survivors from U-608. On the USS Sullivan, Lieutenant Commander O'Brien was chasing U-724. The German submarine had broken away from the pack when the lights came on, her commander recognizing immediately that this was a trap and making a run for it. U-724 was racing on the surface at her maximum speed of 17 knots, trying to open the range, trying to get far enough away to dive safely. O'Brien wasn't going to let that happen. All ahead flank, he ordered, his Irish temper fully engaged now. Get me 30 knots. I want that boat. The USS Sullivan surged forward, her four boilers pouring power into her turbines, her twin screws thrashing the water white. The destroyer's bow rose as she accelerated, cutting through the swells, closing the distance. Guns, O'Brien shouted. Continuous fire. I don't care if you hit them. Just keep their heads down. Make them maneuver. Slow them down. Sullivan's 5-inch guns began firing as fast as the crews could load them. Shells fell all around the fleeing submarine, sending up geysers, forcing U-724 to zigzag, slowing her escape. The range closed. 4,000 yards. 3,500. 3,000. O'Brien's executive officer looked at him. Sir, we're in torpedo range. Should we use the 5-inch guns to finish her? O'Brien touched the photograph in his jacket pocket, thought about Maggie, about 53 days, about promises he intended to keep. No, he said, we're going to do something they'll never expect. Helm hard right, rudder. Bring us broadside to the target. Torpedoes prepare to fire full spread of 5. It was almost unheard of for a destroyer to use torpedoes against a submarine. Torpedoes were for hitting other surface ships, but O'Brien recognized that his 10 21-inch torpedoes had longer range and bigger warheads than anything else he could throw at the fleeing U-boat. Sullivan heeled over hard as she turned, presenting her broadside. The torpedo tubes trained out. Torpedoes fire spread of 5, O'Brien commanded. 5 torpedoes launched in rapid succession, each one 21 inches in diameter, 24 feet long, carrying over 600 pounds of TNT. They hit the water running, accelerating to 46 knots, their contra-rotating propellers leaving distinctive wakes. On U-724, Oberleutnant Helmut Fischer saw the torpedo wakes streaking toward him through the darkness. 5 white lines in the illuminated water, coming fast, death, moving at 53 miles per hour. He had one chance. Emergency dive, Fischer shouted. All hands below. Dive, dive, dive. U-724's klaxon sounded. The vents opened. Water rushed into the ballast tanks. The bow tilted down. The conning tower began to sink below the surface. The first torpedo passed 3 feet over the diving submarine, missing. The second torpedo did the same. But the third torpedo struck U-724's stern just as her propellers went under. The explosion was tremendous. 600 pounds of TNT detonating against the submarine's after section, blowing off the rudder, destroying both propeller shafts, flooding the engine room and the aft torpedo room. The blast killed 8 men instantly and doomed the rest. U-724 lost all power. She hung suspended in the water for a moment, neither rising nor sinking, her crew desperately trying to regain control. But with no propulsion, no steering, and flooding in multiple compartments, she was finished. Surface the boat, Fischer ordered, his voice calm despite knowing what this meant. Blow all ballast tanks. Get us up. We're abandoning ship. U-724's emergency air system forced the water from her ballast tanks. She broke through to the surface, listing heavily to port her stern, underwater dying. Fischer climbed topside and looked at the destroyer bearing down on him. He could see the American flag flying from her mast, could see sailors on her deck, could see his enemy clearly for the first time. All hands, he called down the hatch. Abandon ship. Everyone out. Help the wounded. The crew of U-724 emerged, launching life rafts, helping injured shipmates into the cold water. 29 men escaped the sinking submarine. 23 went down with her. O'Brien watched through binoculars as U-724 settled lower in the water. He could see German sailors in the water, see them waving for help, see them struggling in the cold. He made a decision that would later be praised by Admiral Richardson himself. Cease fire, O'Brien ordered. All stop. Rescue stations, launch boats. We're picking them up. His executive officer stared at him. Sir, we're in the middle of a battle. There are still 4 U-boats out there. O'Brien's hand touched the photograph over his heart again. Thought about the kind of man Maggie would want to marry. The kind of man he wanted to be. Those are sailors in the water, XO. Men who fought bravely and lost. We don't leave sailors to drown. Not on my ship, not ever. The USS Sullivan came to a stop beside the sinking U-724. Boats were lowered. American sailors pulled German sailors from the water, wrapping them in blankets, giving them coffee, treating them with the same care they would give their own shipmates. Fisher was one of the last to be pulled aboard. He stood on Sullivan's deck, dripping wet, shivering, looking at the American sailors surrounding him. Young men like his crew had been. Boys doing their duty. Boys who could have left him to die and no one would have questioned it. An American seaman handed him a blanket and a cup of coffee. Fisher took them with trembling hands. "Why?" he asked in broken English. "We try to kill you. Why you save us?" The seaman shrugged. "War's over for you now, sir. Welcome aboard." Fisher started crying, not from relief or fear or grief, though he felt all those things, but from something else, something he couldn't name, some understanding that the men who had destroyed his boat were also the men who saved his life. That war was more complicated than he had ever imagined. U-724 slipped beneath the waves 10 minutes later, her bow pointing skyward one final time before she disappeared. Another submarine, another crew, another set of families who would receive telegrams. But 29 men would survive to see their families again. 29 men who would go home after the war and tell stories about the American destroyer captain who stopped in the middle of a battle to pull drowning Germans from the sea. 4 U-boats down, 4 to go. But the remaining submarines were not going quietly. On U-496 Captain, Lieutenant Otto Schneider had seen what happened to his fellow commanders, had watched 4 boats die in quick succession, had realized that staying on the surface meant death. He had one advantage. His boat was the furthest from the American destroyers, almost at the edge of their searchlight range. If he could dive now while they were distracted with the other targets, he might escape. "Clear the bridge," Schneider ordered. "Prepare for emergency dive. Rig for silent running." His crew moved with practiced efficiency. Men poured below. Hatches sealed. The submarine began to submerge quickly, but controlled not the panic crash dive that had killed U-309's crew. On the Bainbridge, Sullivan watched U-496 disappear from his searchlight beam. "Sonar, do you have contact on that last boat western target?" "Negative, sir. Too much interference from the other contacts. If she's gone quiet, we might have lost her." Sullivan cursed under his breath. 4 kills was excellent. But if even one submarine escaped to report what happened here, the strategic advantage would be compromised. "All ships, this is Bainbridge. We have a fish running silent, last position approximately bearing 270 range 12,000 yards. Form search line. Pattern Alpha. We're going to find her." The 5 destroyers spread out, creating a sonar picket line, systematically searching every square mile of ocean where U-496 might be hiding. It was Chief Anderson on Bainbridge, whose skilled ears finally detected the submarine. "Sir," Anderson called, "I have something, very faint, bearing 275 range 8,000 yards. It's subtle, but I'm hearing sounds consistent with a submarine at deep depth. Could be pumps or ballast tank sounds. Maybe someone dropped something." Brief metallic noise, then silence again. Sullivan smiled grimly. "That's our fish. Well done, Chief. Guide us in." Bainbridge crept forward at bare steerage way, her sonar tracking the sound getting closer. At a depth of 350 feet, right at the edge of a Type 7 U-boat's maximum safe diving depth, U-496 was doing her best to hide. But she couldn't stay silent forever. Inside the submarine, the air was growing foul. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. The crew was ordered to lie still, to breathe shallow, to minimize oxygen consumption. But 52 men in a sealed tube, even breathing quietly, produced a lot of CO2. Schneider looked at his watch. They had been down for 30 minutes. The batteries were at 60%. The air was getting worse by the minute. They could stay down another hour, maybe 2, before they had to surface or suffocate. Outside, the Americans were waiting. Sullivan coordinated with the USS Harper, getting Chen's ship into position on the opposite side of the hidden submarine. "Michael," Sullivan said into his radio, "I'm going to bracket this one. Bainbridge will attack from the west, Harper from the east. Simultaneous hedgehog drop. That should cover enough area that she can't evade." "Understood," Chen replied. "Standing by for your execute order." Sullivan waited until both ships were in perfect position, their sonar operators confirming the target, their hedgehog crews ready. "On my mark," Sullivan said. 3, 2, 1, execute." Both destroyers fired simultaneously. 48 hedgehog projectiles entered the water from opposite directions, creating an inescapable pattern of death. Inside U-496, Schneider heard the splashes, knew what was coming. made his final decision. Emergency blow, surface. Get us up. Now. The submarine's high-pressure air system forced water from her ballast tanks. U-496 began rising, trying to surface, trying to get above the falling hedgehog projectiles. She almost made it. 12 projectiles struck her hull while she was still at 100 feet depth. The explosions crushed the submarine's pressure hull, but didn't completely destroy her. She continued rising, mortally wounded, vomiting air and oil from her ruptured tanks. U-496 broke through to the surface, rolling onto her side, flooding, dying. Her crew began pouring out of the hatches, those who could still move, those who hadn't been killed in the explosions. Sullivan watched through binoculars. Rescue stations, launch boats, get those men out of the water. 17 men from U-496's crew of 52 survived to be picked up. Schneider was among them, pulled unconscious from the water with a fractured skull and broken ribs. He would survive, would spend the rest of the war in a Canadian POW camp, would return to Germany in 1947 and never go to sea again. 5 down, 3 to go, and those 3 submarines were proving even more elusive. Midnight. The battle had been raging for 1 hour. 5 German submarines destroyed, 3 still hunting in the darkness, and one of them was being very, very clever. U-615, commanded by Kapitän Lieutenant Werner Schmidt, had gone silent the moment the searchlights came on. Schmidt was a veteran of 15 patrols, one of the most experienced commanders in the Kriegsmarine. He had survived 2 years of war by being unpredictable, by doing things other captains would never consider. When the trap sprang, Schmidt didn't try to run, didn't try to dive in a panic. Instead, he ordered an immediate controlled dive to 300 feet, shut down every unnecessary system, and went dead silent. His submarine drifted with the current, a ghost in the darkness, while the battle raged above. Now he waited. Inside U-615, the silence was absolute. No engines, no motors, no pumps, just the creaking of the pressure hull as it dealt with the stress of being at the edge of its safe depth. 52 men lay motionless in their bunks or at their stations, barely breathing, trying to make no sound at all. Schmidt stood in the control room, one hand on the periscope, watching his men. They were scared. He could see it in their eyes, in the way they held themselves rigid, in the sweat on their faces despite the cold. "Steady, lads," he whispered. "We've done this before. We'll do it again. Just stay quiet. Stay still. The Americans will get tired of searching. They'll leave, and when they do, we'll surface and get the hell out of here." But one of his men, a young torpedo man named Hans Weber, was fighting a losing battle with his own body. 21 years old, from Berlin, Weber had been suffering from a bad cold for the past week. Now, at the worst possible moment, he needed to cough. He held it back, clamped his jaw shut, covered his mouth with both hands, tried to breathe through the tickle in his throat, the burning in his lungs. Held it, held it, held it. Then his wrench slipped from where it had been tucked into his belt. It fell perhaps 2 feet before hitting the steel deck with a sharp metallic clang. The sound echoed through the submarine. Everyone froze. Weber's face went white with horror. Schmidt closed his eyes. "Scheisse," he whispered. On the Bainbridge, Chief Anderson's head snapped up. "Sir, I heard something. Bearing 185, range 3,200 yards. Metallic clang, brief but distinct. Then silence again." Sullivan grabbed the intercom. "All ships, we have contact. Bearing 185 from Bainbridge, range 3,200. Target is deep, probably 300 feet. Harper come about to intercept. Montgomery, form up on our starboard side. We're going to creeping attack this one." In U-615, Schmidt knew his luck had run out. "Rig for depth charge," he ordered quietly. "All hands brace for impact." The crew prepared as best they could, securing equipment, checking valves, making sure nothing else could fall or make noise. They had survived depth charge attacks before. Maybe they would survive this one. But Schmidt knew the Americans had something new. Something his intelligence reports had mentioned, but no German captain had encountered and lived to describe. Some kind of forward-throwing weapon that didn't miss. He was about to find out what it was. The USS Bainbridge and USS Harper moved into position on opposite sides of U-615's last known position, their sonar operators tracking the faint sounds of pumps and ballast systems that no submarine could completely silence. "Target bearing 187, range 2,000 yards, depth 300 feet, Anderson reported. Contact is solid, sir, Sullivan calculated in his head. 300 feet, at the edge of the Type 7 safe diving depth. Schmidt was gambling that the depth would protect him, that American weapons couldn't reach him there. Schmidt was wrong. Helm steady as she goes. Hedgehog crew stand by for firing solution at deep target. The Hedgehog crew adjusted their aim, compensating for the depth, calculating the trajectory needed for the projectiles to reach 300 feet below the surface. Solution set, the weapons officer reported. Fire, Sullivan ordered. 24 Hedgehog projectiles arced from Bainbridge's foredeck. A moment later, 24 more launched from Harper. 48 projectiles entering the water, sinking quickly, spreading out in their pattern. In U-615, the sonar operator heard them coming. Capitan, multiple splashes above us. Something is falling. Schmidt braced himself against the periscope. Here it comes. The first Hedgehog projectile struck U-615's hull at frame 23 port side just forward of the control room. The 65-pound warhead detonated on contact, blowing a 3-foot hole in the pressure hull. Water exploded into the submarine under tremendous pressure. Then another hit, and another, and another. In 15 seconds, 615 was struck by 14 Hedgehog projectiles. Her pressure hull collapsed in multiple places. Compartments flooded instantly. The submarine's spine broke in the middle. She began plummeting toward the ocean floor in 2 pieces. Schmidt had time to think one clear thought. So that's what killed the others. Then water filled the control room and everything went black. Hans Weber, the young torpedo man, whose dropped wrench had sealed all their fates, drowned in the forward torpedo room. His last thought was of his mother in Berlin, wondering what she would think when she received the telegram. U-615 scattered across the ocean floor in pieces. 52 more men dead. 52 more families who would mourn. On Bainbridge's bridge, Anderson's voice was almost sad. Multiple detonations. Breakup noises. She's gone, sir. Sullivan nodded. 6 down, 2 to go. But the last 2 submarines were the most dangerous of all. U-533, commanded by Kapitän Leutnant Ludwig Fischer, had managed to evade detection by staying at the very edge of the battle area. Fischer watched through his periscope as his fellow U-boats were systematically destroyed. Watched the American destroyers coordinate their attacks with terrifying efficiency. Watched 6 boats die in less than an hour. He wasn't going to join them. Radio Fischer ordered, prepare a contact report to BDU. Tell them we've encountered a trap. 8 boats engaged. At least 6 destroyed. American destroyers using new weapons. Extremely dangerous. His radio operator looked at him with fear in his eyes. Capitan, if we transmit, they'll detect us. They'll know exactly where we are. I know, Fischer said quietly. But if we don't warn the others, if the entire wolf pack sails into this trap, we could lose 23 boats in one night. The radio transmission is worth dying for. He looked around at his crew. Young men who trusted him, who followed him, who would die on his order. I'm sorry, lads, he said, but this is what duty requires. Fischer's radio operator began transmitting. The burst lasted 5 seconds. 5 seconds of high-speed coded transmission that would warn Admiral Dienitz, that would save other U-boats, that would change German submarine tactics for the rest of the war. 5 seconds that sealed U-533's fate. On every American destroyer, radio operators triangulated the signal instantly. Radio transmission bearing 093. Strong signal, very close range. Sullivan didn't hesitate. All ships converge on bearing 093. That boat just signed her death warrant. Find her and kill her. U-533 tried to run. Fischer pushed his electric motors to maximum speed, diving deep, trying to put distance between himself and the hunters. But 5 destroyers converging from multiple directions gave him nowhere to go. Lieutenant Commander Chen on the USS Harper got the killing shot. His sonar operator tracked U-533 through a series of evasive maneuvers, staying with her, maintaining contact even when the submarine went to her maximum depth. Target steady on bearing 097 range, 1,500 yards depth, 250 feet, the sonar operator reported. She's trying to run, sir, but we're faster. Chen coordinated with the USS Thornton Martinez, bringing his ship in from the opposite direction. 2 destroyers, 1 submarine, no escape. On my mark, Chen said into his radio. Simultaneous drop, 3, 2, 1, execute. Both destroyers fired their Hedgehogs. 48 projectiles. Fisher tried one last evasive maneuver, turning hard to starboard, diving deeper. 9 projectiles struck U-533. The submarine's back broke. She plummeted to the bottom in 2 pieces. Fisher and his crew of 52 died knowing they had done their duty. The warning had been sent. Other boats would be saved. It was small comfort in the moment of drowning. 7 down, Sullivan said quietly. 1 more. The last submarine was U-608, or so they thought. In fact, U-608 had already been destroyed earlier in the battle. Her crew had abandoned ship and were floating in the Atlantic, waiting to be picked up. Lieutenant Commander Jackson's USS Montgomery was in the process of recovering them when the last U-boat revealed itself. U-274A submarine that intelligence had not known was in the area. She had been running silent on the edge of the patrol and undetected, watching the massacre of her sister boats. Now her commander, Captain Lieutenant Ernst Hoffman, made a desperate decision. Load tubes 1 through 4, he ordered. Target the destroyer that stopped, the one picking up survivors. His torpedo officer stared at him. Capitan, that destroyer is rescuing our men, our comrades from U-608. I know, Hoffman said, his face hard as stone, but those Americans destroyed 7 of our boats, killed 350 of our sailors. This is war. Load the tubes. The torpedo man obeyed, though his hands shook as he worked. On the USS Montgomery, Jackson stood on the bridge wing, watching his rescue crews pull German sailors from the water. 17 men so far, cold, exhausted, grateful to be alive. Sir, his sonar operator called urgently, I have a new contact, close aboard, bearing 330 range, 2,000 yards. She's shallow, sir. And I hear torpedo doors opening. Jackson's blood ran cold. A U-boat, close enough to kill them. And Montgomery was dead in the water, unable to maneuver her rescue boats in the water. General quarters, Jackson shouted. All engines ahead, flank. Hard right rudder. Get those boats inboard now. But it was too late. They were too close, too vulnerable. On U-274, Hoffman gave the order he had trained his whole career to give. Fire tubes 1 through 4. Forward. 4 torpedoes launched from U-274's bow tubes. G-7E electric torpedoes virtually silent, leaving no wake. Programmed to run at 15 feet depth. Aimed at the stopped American destroyer. Jackson watched the torpedoes coming through the darkened water. Saw the ghostly shapes beneath the surface. Saw death approaching at 45 knots. Calculated the time to impact. 15 seconds. Montgomery was accelerating, but too slowly. The torpedoes were too close. At least one would hit, maybe all 4. And a single torpedo could break a destroyer's back. Then the USS Sullivan arrived. Lieutenant Commander O'Brien had been completing his rescue of U-724's survivors when he saw Montgomery in trouble, saw the stopped destroyer, saw the torpedo tracks in the water, made an instantaneous decision. All ahead, flank helm, put us between Montgomery and those torpedoes. The helmsman stared at him. Sir, that will put us in the path of those fish. O'Brien's hand touched the photograph over his heart. Thought of Maggie, thought of 53 days, thought of promises. Then he thought of Jackson's 3 children, thought of the 200 men aboard Montgomery, thought of what it meant to be a destroyer captain. Do it, O'Brien ordered. The USS Sullivan raced forward, interposing herself between the torpedoes and Montgomery. It was a sacrifice play, a deliberate decision to take the hit so another ship could survive. The first torpedo missed passing astern. The second torpedo missed passing ahead. The third torpedo struck the USS Sullivan amidship starboard side, just below the waterline. The explosion lifted the destroyer's stern out of the water. The warhead detonated against the hull, blowing a 15-foot hole in the plating, flooding 2 engineering spaces instantly. The blast killed 6 men in the engine room and wounded a dozen more. O'Brien was thrown against the bulkhead by the impact. He felt something hit his chest hard enough to take his breath away. For a moment, he thought he had been hit by shrapnel, thought he was dying. Then he realized what had saved him. The photograph. Margaret's photograph tucked in his jacket pocket over his heart. The thick paper in its metal frame had stopped a piece of shrapnel that otherwise would have pierced his lung. The photo was ruin-torn and burned with a hole through the center. But O'Brien was alive. Damage report, he shouted, pulling himself upright. His executive officer, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, grabbed a phone. Listened. Looked at O'Brien with wide eyes. Sir, we're flooding in engineering spaces 2 and 3. Lost power to the starboard shaft. Can't make more than 15 knots. But the bulkheads are holding. We're not sinking. O'Brien touched the ruined photograph in his pocket, thought about 53 days, thought about how close he had just come to never making it. Get damage control teams working on those floods, he ordered, and find me that U-boat. Somebody is going to pay for putting a hole in my ship. On U-274, Hoffman was horrified. He had hit a destroyer, yes, but not the one he was aiming at. And now 8 American warships were hunting for him, all of them enraged, all of them wanting revenge. Crash dive, Hoffman ordered. Take us down, silent running, go deep. But it was too late. Too many destroyers, too close, too angry. The USS Thornton Martinez, finally getting his moment to shine, was the closest to U-274's dive position. I have her, his sonar operator shouted. Bearing 325 range, 1,000 yards shallow depth. She's diving, but she's not deep yet. Martinez didn't coordinate with anyone else. Didn't wait for orders. This was his kill. Hedgehog fire, he commanded. 24 projectiles launched. 18 struck U-274 before she reached 100 feet depth. The submarine disintegrated under the multiple impacts. Hoffman and his crew died without ever reaching the safety of the deep water. 8 submarines destroyed. 396 German sailors dead. The Battle of the North Atlantic had turned decisively in favor of the Allies. But the cost had been paid too. The USS Sullivan damaged trailing oil limping on one shaft. 6 American sailors dead, 15 wounded. And O'Brien standing on his damaged bridge, pulling the ruined photograph from his pocket, looking at Maggie's face through the hole where shrapnel had passed. Thank you, he whispered to the image. Thank you for saving my life. The battle was over, but the war was far from done. April 24th, 1943, 0600 hours. Dawn came slowly to the North Atlantic, the sun barely visible through the overcast, turning the gray sky a lighter shade of gray, the black water a dark blue. The 5 American destroyers were scattered across perhaps 10 square miles of ocean, connected by signal lamp and radio, counting their survivors, treating their wounded, searching for any sign that the battle had actually happened. On the USS Bainbridge, Commander Sullivan stood at his usual position on the bridge wing, staring at the empty ocean. The searchlights were extinguished now. The guns were secured. The Hedgehog crews were standing down. The ship had returned to normal steaming speed, making 8 knots in a slow circular pattern while they regrouped with the squadron. Sullivan hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the battle, every decision, every order, wondering if he could have done something different. Could have saved the men who died on U-274, both German and American. Could have prevented the damage to O'Brien's ship, but he knew that was pointless. War didn't allow for second guessing. You made your decisions in the moment with imperfect information and lived with the consequences, or died with them. Reed appeared at his elbow carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Sullivan. Sir, you need to rest. You've been up for 26 hours. Sullivan took the coffee gratefully. I'll rest when we're back in Halifax. Right now I need to write a report for Admiral Richardson. And letters. 6 letters to families of men who won't be coming home. 6 on the USS Sullivan, Reed said quietly. But the rest of the squadron is intact. 1,000 men survived a battle that could have killed us all. That's because of your leadership, sir, your tactics, your courage. Sullivan looked at him. 396 German sailors died last night, Tom. 396 men who had families, mothers, sweethearts, children. I gave the orders that killed them. That's not courage. That's just arithmetic. It's both, sir, and you know it. Sullivan pulled Johnny's dog tags from his pocket. They felt lighter now, like some weight had been lifted from them. Or maybe he was just too tired to feel the burden anymore. I promised my mother I'd bring Johnny home when we won this war, he said. I can't do that. His body is at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. But maybe, just maybe, I helped make his death mean something. Helped save some other mother's son. You did, sir. You saved convoy HX-234. 67 merchant ships. 3,000 sailors. All of them going to reach England safely because of what we did last night. Sullivan nodded slowly. Then it was worth it. Below decks in Bainbridge's galley, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Williams was preparing breakfast. Not bacon this time. They had used the last of it yesterday morning. Now it was powdered eggs and hardtack and coffee, so thick you could stand a spoon in it. But the men ate it gratefully. They were alive to eat it. That was enough. Seaman Tommy Miller sat at the same table where he'd eaten bacon yesterday morning, but this time he ate in silence. Jimmy Davis was beside him, also quiet, both men processing what they had survived. "I thought we were going to die," Tommy said finally. "When those torpedoes were in the water, when that U-boat got close, I really thought this was it." Davis took a long drink of coffee. "We came close, kid, real close. But we made it. And you know what? When we get back to port, I'm going to call Helen. Going to tell her I love her. Going to request transfer to shore duty so I can watch my kids grow up." "You think they'll approve that?" "Don't care if they do or not. Life's too short to spend it all at sea. I want to go home, Tommy. I want to be with my family." Tommy thought about his mother, about Katie, about the farm in Iowa. "Me too," he said. "When this war is over, I'm going home. Going to help Dad with the farm. Going to sit at Mom's table and eat her cooking. Going to watch Katie grow up. And I'm never, ever going to complain about anything being boring again." Across the table, a gunner's mate named Rodriguez was staring at his hands. They were still shaking, the adrenaline from last night's battle not yet worn off. "I killed a lot of men last night," Rodriguez said to no one in particular. "Loaded shells, fired guns, dropped hedgehogs, killed a lot of men." Tommy looked at him. "They were trying to kill us." "I know, but that doesn't make it feel better. They were just sailors, like us, doing their job, following orders, and I killed them." No one had an answer to that. There was no good answer. War didn't offer comfort to the conscience. It only offered survival or death, and you took what you could get. On the USS Sullivan, Lieutenant Commander O'Brien was in his cabin writing a letter to Maggie. His hand was steady now, though it had shaken for the first hour after the torpedo hit. Around him, the ship groaned and creaked, damage control teams still working to patch the hole in her hull pumps, running to keep the flooding controlled. "My darling Maggie," he wrote, "last night I almost broke my promise to you. Almost didn't make it to our wedding. A German torpedo struck my ship. 6 of my boys died, and I should have died with them." He paused, looking at the ruined photograph on his desk. The hole through the center, the burned edges, the image barely visible anymore. "But you saved me. Your photograph, the one I keep over my heart, stopped a piece of shrapnel that would have killed me. You saved my life from 3,000 miles away. You kept me alive." He picked up the photo, held it gently. "I'm coming home, Maggie. I'm coming home to you. 53 days, June 15th. I'll be there. I promise. The Germans couldn't stop me. The Atlantic couldn't stop me. Nothing is going to stop me from seeing you walk down that aisle." He sealed the letter, addressed it, set it aside to mail when they reached Halifax. Then he pulled a second sheet of paper and began writing the 6 letters he dreaded most. The letters to families, to mothers and fathers and wives who would learn that their loved ones died under his command. "Dear Mrs. Thompson," he began, "it is with profound sorrow that I must inform you of the death of your son, Seaman First Class Robert Thompson. In the Bainbridge's sickbay, the ship's doctor was treating the wounded from the USS Sullivan. 15 men had been injured in the torpedo explosion. 6 were serious. 9 were minor. All would survive. One of them, a young ensign named Peters, had suffered a concussion when the blast threw him against a bulkhead. Now he lay in a bunk, awake but groggy, asking the same question over and over. Did we win? Did we win?" The doctor patted his shoulder. "Yes, son, we won. 8 U-boats destroyed, all of them." "How many did we lose?" 6 men on the Sullivan, that's all, 6 out of 1,000. Peters closed his eyes. 6, that's good, that's real good. Then he drifted back to sleep. On the USS Montgomery, Lieutenant Commander Jackson stood on the fantail watching the sun rise, thinking about his 3 children. 8-year-old Thomas, 6-year-old Elizabeth, 4-year-old James. He had almost left them without a father last night. If O'Brien hadn't put his ship between Montgomery and those torpedoes, Jackson would be dead. His crew would be dead. His children would be orphans. "Sir," his executive officer said, "signal from Sullivan. O'Brien wants to know if we're okay." Jackson smiled. Tell him we're fine. All hands accounted for, zero casualties. And tell him thank you. Tell him I owe him my life. Aye, aye, sir. Jackson looked back at the sunrise. In a few hours they would be in Halifax. He would file his report, write his after-action summary, recommend O'Brien for a medal, maybe the Navy Cross. The man had deliberately put himself in harm's way to save another ship. That was above and beyond. That was heroism. Then Jackson would request permission to call home, to talk to his wife, to hear his children's voices, to tell them he was coming home soon, to tell them he loved them. On the fantail of this Bainbridge, 17 German sailors huddled together under wool blankets drinking coffee, still processing the fact that they were alive. They were the survivors of U-608, the submarine that had been abandoned after being hit by gunfire. Kapitän Leutnant Franz Weber sat with them, watching the American sailors move around the deck, conducting their morning routine. The Americans had treated them well, given them dry clothes, fed them, treated their injuries. Not once had anyone hit them or insulted them or done anything cruel. It confused Weber. His propaganda training had taught him that Americans were soft, weak, that they would collapse under pressure, that they had no stomach for war. Last night had proven all of that wrong. An American seaman approached with a basket of bread and a pot of butter. "Breakfast, sirs," the seaman said in halting German. "Not much, but it's hot." Weber took a piece of bread. "Thank you, you are kind." The American shrugged. "War's over for you guys. You fought hard. You lost. That's all." "My men," Weber said carefully, "the ones who went down with my boat. What happens to them?" The American's face grew serious. "They're sailors, sir. They'll rest in peace at the bottom of the ocean." "That's an honorable grave for a sailor. Better than most get." Weber nodded, thought about the 35 men from his crew who had died when U-608 went down. Good men, young men, men who had trusted him to bring them home. He had failed them. "In Germany," Weber said quietly, "we are told that Americans are our enemies, that you want to destroy us, that you have no honor." The American sailor smiled sadly. "In America, we're told the same about Germans. Funny how that works. But you saved us. You could have left us in the water, could have let us drown. No one would have blamed you." "Maybe. But we're sailors. We don't leave sailors to die if we can save them. Doesn't matter what flag they serve under." Weber was quiet for a long moment. "Then, when the war is over, I hope to understand why you Americans are so different. So strange." "Maybe that's what we're fighting for," the American said. "So you can find out." At 0700 hours, Admiral Richardson in Halifax received the coded message from Commander Sullivan. "Mission accomplished. 8 enemy submarines destroyed. All owned ships returning. 1 ship damaged but seaworthy. 6 friendly KIA. 15 friendly WEIA. Estimate 396 enemy KIA. 29 enemy POE convoy A. Checks 2, 3, 4 are clear to proceed. Request instructions." Richardson read the message 3 times. Then he set it down on his desk and put his head in his hands. They had done it. Sullivan had done it. 8 U-boats destroyed in one night. The tactical victory of the war so far. And only 6 American casualties. 6 families who would receive telegrams. 6 mothers who would cry. It could have been so much worse. Richardson picked up his phone. "Get me Admiral King in Washington. Scrambled line. This is urgent." 2 hours later, Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet, was reading the same report in his office in Washington, D.C. "We're 8 U-boats," King said to his Chief of Staff. 8 submarines in 4 hours. All destroyed. This changes everything. "Sir, it proves the tactics work. Coordinated destroyer groups, hedgehog weapons, aggressive offense instead of passive defense. If we can replicate this across the Atlantic," King nodded slowly, "we can turn the tide. We can make the Germans afraid to send out their wolf packs. We can protect the convoys. We can win this war." He reached for his pen. "Send a message to Commander Sullivan. Tell him to return to Halifax immediately. Tell him he's being promoted to captain and awarded the Navy Cross. Tell him his squadron is being held up as an example for every destroyer captain in the Atlantic Fleet." "Yes, sir." King stared at the report one more time. 8 submarines. 396 German sailors. The mathematics of war written in blood. but also 67 merchant ships saved, 3,000 sailors who would reach England safely, thousands of tons of supplies that would feed Britain. Months shortened off the war. The mathematics worked. The killing was worth it, even if it never felt good. At 0900 hours, the 5 destroyers of Squadron 18 formed up in line-ahead formation and set course for Halifax. The damaged USS Sullivan was third in line, trailing a thin sheen of oil, making 12 knots, but still afloat, still fighting, still proud. On every ship, crews were cleaning up after the battle, securing gear, reloading weapons, making repairs, preparing written reports, and thinking about the men who died. 6 American sailors killed by the torpedo hit on Sullivan. Chief Machinist, Mate Harold Thompson, age 32 from Detroit. Fireman, First Class Robert Martinez, age 19 from Los Angeles. Seaman, Second Class William Chen, age 20 from San Francisco. Seaman First Class James Murphy, age 24 from Boston. Fireman Second Class David Johnson, age 21 from Atlanta. Seaman Second Class Michael O'Connor, age 19 from New York. 6 names to add to the casualty lists. 6 families to notify. 6 funerals to hold. 396 German sailors dead. Their names would never be known to the Americans who killed them. They would be statistics, numbers in a report, as shown, tonnage subtracted from the Kriegsmarine order of battle. But in Germany, 396 families would receive telegrams. 396 mothers would cry. 396 fathers would rage. 396 sweethearts would mourn. War did not distinguish between winners and losers when it came to grief. On the Bainbridge, Sullivan finally went to his cabin at 0930 hours. He had been awake for 30 hours straight. His eyes burned. His body ached. His mind was numb with exhaustion. He sat at his desk and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. Began writing. Dear Sarah, if you are reading this, then I survived. We won. 8 submarines destroyed. Convoy saved. Mission accomplished. But I don't feel like we won. 6 of our boys died. 396 of theirs died. That's 402 mothers who will cry. 402 families who will never be whole again. I carried Johnny's tags in my pocket. I carried them through the whole battle. Thought about him with every order I gave. And I realized something. Johnny didn't die at Pearl Harbor so I could kill more men. He died so that someday maybe we could live in a world where we don't have to kill anyone. I don't know if we'll win this war. I don't know if I'll survive to see the end of it. But I know this: every man who dies makes that world a little further away. Every death, American or German or Japanese, pushes us further from the peace we're supposedly fighting for. I'm tired, Sarah. Tired of war. Tired of killing. Tired of writing letters to mothers whose sons won't come home. But I'll keep fighting because someone has to. Because if I don't, then Johnny's death means nothing. And I can't accept that. I love you. I'm coming home. Wait for me, James. He sealed the letter, unaddressed it, set it aside to mail from Halifax. Then he lay down on his bunk, still in his uniform, still wearing his shoes, and fell asleep. He dreamed of 8 submarines sinking into the darkness, of 396 men drowning, of Johnny's face young and smiling the way he looked before Pearl Harbor. And in the dream, Johnny said, "You did good, James, you did good." But Sullivan wasn't sure he believed it. June 15th, 1945. St. Mary's Church, Boston, Massachusetts. Lieutenant Commander Patrick O'Brien stood at the altar in his dress white uniform, watching Margaret Riley walk down the aisle toward him. She wore a simple white dress, not elaborate because fabric was still rationed, even though the war in Europe had ended a month ago, but she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Her red hair was pinned up with small white flowers. Her green eyes shone with tears. She smiled at him, and O'Brien felt his heart might burst from his chest. The war was over. He had survived. He had kept his promise. 53 days he had told her 2 years ago. 53 days until he would see her walk down this aisle. It had actually been 783 days, but who was counting? The important thing was that he was here. She was here. They were getting married. The priest began the ceremony. O'Brien barely heard the words. He was too busy memorizing this moment. The way the sunlight came through the stained glass windows. The way Maggie's hand felt in his. The way she looked at him like he was the only man in the world. Do you, Patrick Michael O'Brien, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, O'Brien said, his voice strong and clear. And do you, Margaret Ann Riley, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Maggie said, and she was crying now, happy tears streaming down her face. Then by the power vested in me by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the Catholic Church, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. O'Brien kissed his wife for the first time, and the church erupted in applause. Later at the reception, O'Brien's best man, his brother Sean, gave a toast. To Patrick and Margaret, Sean said, raising his glass. Pat served on a destroyer in the Atlantic. He fought in the battle that broke the U-boat wolf packs. He took a torpedo hit that should have sunk his ship. And through it all, he never stopped writing to Maggie, never stopped believing he'd make it home. Sean pulled something from his pocket, a photograph torn and burned with a hole through the center. This is the photo Maggie gave Pat before he shipped out. He kept it over his heart through the whole war. And on the night his ship was hit by a torpedo, this photo stopped a piece of shrapnel that would have killed him. He held up the ruined photo for everyone to see. Pat told me that wasn't the photo that saved him. It was love. Love kept him alive. Love brought him home. Love made him the man standing here today. Sean raised his glass higher. So here's to love. May it always be stronger than war. To Patrick and Margaret O'Brien. To Patrick and Margaret, the room shouted back. O'Brien looked at Maggie. She was crying again, holding the ruined photo, looking at the hole that could have killed him. You saved my life, O'Brien whispered to her. 3,000 miles away, you saved my life. Maggie kissed him. Then we're even, because you saved mine too. You gave me a reason to keep believing, to keep hoping, to keep living. We saved each other, Patrick. Across the room, Sullivan sat with Sarah watching the celebration. He had been promoted to captain after the battle, had commanded a destroyer squadron for the rest of the war, had survived another 3 years of combat, had seen VE Day, had seen VJ Day, had finally come home. Now he wore civilian clothes and taught naval tactics at the academy, passed on what he learned, trained the next generation, tried to make sure they didn't have to learn the same lessons at such a high cost. Sarah leaned against his shoulder. You're thinking about that night again. The battle. Sullivan nodded. Always do when I see O'Brien. When I remember how close we came to losing him. Losing all of them. But you didn't. You brought them home. All of them except 6. 6 too many. 6 out of 1,000, James. You saved 994 men that night. You need to remember that too. Sullivan pulled Johnny's dog tags from his pocket. He still carried them. Probably always would. But they felt lighter now, like some of the burden had been lifted. Johnny would be 30 now, he said quietly. Would have finished college. Had a career. Maybe gotten married. Had kids. I know, Sarah said. But he'll always be 22. Always young. Always at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. I know, Sarah said again. She took his hand, held it tight. On the dance floor, O'Brien and Maggie swayed to the music, holding each other close. Not really dancing, just being together. Being alive. Being in love. 53 days, Maggie whispered. What? You told me 53 days until you'd see me walk down the aisle. You kept your promise, Patrick. You came home. O'Brien kissed the top of her head. I'll always come home to you, Maggie. Always. But even in the middle of the celebration, even surrounded by beauty and laughter and love, O'Brien couldn't completely forget. Couldn't completely let go of the memory of that night. The lights coming on. The submarines dying. The torpedo hitting his ship. The 6 men who died under his command. He would carry those memories the rest of his life. Would wake up sometimes in the middle of the night 30 years later, 60 years later, hearing the explosion again. Feeling the deck lurch beneath his feet, seeing his men die. That was the price of survival. The weight you carried, the shadow that followed you. But tonight, holding Maggie in his arms, he could almost forget. Almost. Almost. June 3rd, 1967, Annapolis, Maryland. Captain James Sullivan, retired, sat in his study in the small house he and Sarah had bought near the Naval Academy. He was 68 years old now, white-haired, slower moving, but his mind was still sharp, still teaching, still trying to make sense of the war he had fought so long ago. On his desk was a letter from Germany. It had arrived that morning, forwarded from the academy. The envelope was addressed in careful, precise handwriting, European script. Sullivan had stared at it for an hour before finally opening it. The letter inside was written in English, translated from German. The woman had noted apologetically in a postscript. "Dear Commander Sullivan," it began, "I am writing to you about the night of April 23, 1943. That night, my husband, Georg Muller, died on U-309. He was a radio man. He was 23 years old. He had never met our daughter, Greta, who was born while he was at sea." Sullivan's hands began to tremble. Georg Muller, U-309, the first submarine they had killed. The submarine that went down so fast that no one survived. "For 24 years, I blamed you," the letter continued. "I blamed America. I taught my daughter to hate the man who killed her father before she could meet him. I told her that Americans were monsters, that you murdered her father in cold blood, that you destroyed our family." Sullivan closed his eyes. He could imagine this woman, this Hilda, raising her daughter alone, teaching her hate, passing on grief like an inheritance. "But yesterday, something happened that made me question everything I believed." Sullivan kept reading. "Greta is 24 now, the same age Georg was when he died. She went to university, studied hard, and last year she was accepted to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in America. She has been there for 9 months now, studying engineering." Sullivan's eyes widened. The daughter of the man he killed was living in America, was studying at MIT, was building a life here. "Yesterday, Greta came home for a visit. She told me about her American friends, her professors, her studies. She told me about the kindness people have shown her, the opportunities America has given her, the future she can build here. And then she asked me a question I could not answer." Sullivan held his breath. "She said, 'Mama, if Papa had won that night, if his U-boat had sunk those American destroyers, how many American families would have lost their fathers? How many American children would have grown up without ever meeting them? How many would still hate us the way we hate them?' I had no answer." The letter continued in Hilda's careful script. "Commander Sullivan, I do not ask for your forgiveness. What happened that night cannot be changed. Georg is dead. 395 of his comrades are dead. 6 of your sailors are dead. All of those deaths are real and permanent and terrible. But Greta is alive. She is studying to be an engineer. She wants to build bridges, not weapons. She wants to connect people, not divide them. She has American friends. She laughs with them, studies with them, shares her life with them. And I realize this is what Georg died for. Not for the Nazi ideology he never really believed in. Not for submarine warfare or U-boat tactics or any of that. He died so that someday maybe his daughter could study engineering in America and build bridges. He died so that the war could end, so that people like Greta could grow up in a world where Germans and Americans are friends, not enemies. I wanted you to know this. I wanted you to know that Georg's death was not meaningless, that it led somehow through all the pain and grief to something good, to my daughter building a life in the country of the man who killed her father. Perhaps that is the only victory that matters now." The letter was signed, "Respectfully, Hilda Muller, Hamburg, Germany." Sullivan read the letter 3 times. Then he set it down and sat in silence for a long time, tears streaming down his face. Sarah found him there an hour later, sitting at his desk, crying, the letter spread out before him. "James, what is it? What's wrong?" Sullivan handed her the letter. "Let her read it," watched her face change as she absorbed the words. "Oh, James," Sarah whispered. "Oh, my love. For 24 years, Sullivan said, his voice thick with emotion, I've carried the weight of those 396 deaths, every single one of them. I've wondered if it was worth it, if the arithmetic balanced, if killing that many men could ever be justified." He picked up Johnny's dog tags from where they lay on his desk, held them one more time. "Now I know. It was worth it. Because Georg Mueller's daughter is studying engineering at MIT. Because Germans and Americans are friends now. Because the war we fought led to the peace we have now." He looked at Sarah. "Johnny died so the war could start. Georg died so it could end. And now Georg's daughter is alive because we won. That's the arithmetic. That's the balance that they brought us." Sarah knelt beside his chair, put her arms around him. You should write back. You should tell her what you just told me. Sullivan nodded. I will. Tomorrow. When I can think clearly. When I can find the right words. But that night, lying in bed, Sullivan realized there were no right words. No perfect response. No way to make 24 years of grief and guilt and grief disappear with a letter. All he could do was acknowledge the truth. That war was terrible. That death was permanent. That 6 American sailors and 396 German sailors all died for something that mattered, even if it took 24 years to understand what that something was. The next morning, Sullivan sat at his desk and wrote, Dear Mrs. Mueller, thank you for your letter. I cannot express how much it meant to me to read your words. For 24 years, I have carried the weight of your husband's death along with the deaths of 395 of his comrades. I have questioned whether the killing was necessary, whether the victory was worth the cost. Your letter helped me understand something I have struggled with since that night, that war is not about who is right, but about what happens after. Your husband and my brother both died in a war neither of them started, but their deaths led to a world where your daughter can study in America and my nieces can grow up in peace. I am so proud of Greta. So proud that she chose to build bridges instead of holding on to hate. So proud that she represents the best of both our nations. If she is willing, I would like to meet her, to tell her about that night, to explain as best I can the decisions I made and why I made them. Not to excuse or justify, but simply to bear witness, to acknowledge that her father was a brave man who died doing his duty and that his death contributed to the world she lives in now. Please tell Greta that her father was a credit to his nation and his service, and that his daughter honors his memory not by hating his enemies, but by building friendships with their children. With deepest respect, Captain James Sullivan, U.S. and retired. He mailed the letter that afternoon. 3 weeks later, on June 24, 1967, a young woman knocked on Sullivan's door in Annapolis. She was 24 years old with dark hair and darker eyes that reminded Sullivan painfully of someone else. Someone he had seen only in photographs and intelligence files and reports of the men aboard U-309. Georg Muller's eyes looking back at him from his daughter's face. Captain Sullivan, she said in accented but clear English. I am Greta Muller. My mother showed me your letter. I would like to talk to you if I may. Sullivan stood aside, gesturing her in. Of course, please, come in. They sat in his study, surrounded by naval history books and photographs and ship models. Sarah brought tea. Then she left them alone. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Greta reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. The same photograph Sullivan had seen 24 years ago in intelligence briefings. A young woman holding a baby, both smiling at the camera. This is the only picture I have of my father, Greta said quietly. My mother and me taken when I was 3 months old. My father had never met me when this was taken. He received this photo just days before he died. She looked up at Sullivan. Tell me about that night. Tell me how he died. Sullivan took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been dreading. The moment he had to look into the eyes of a man he killed's daughter and explain why that death was necessary. Your father died quickly, Sullivan said. Instantly, most likely. The Hedgehog projectile struck his submarine before she could dive to safety. The explosions collapsed the pressure hull. The submarine sank in seconds. No one suffered. No one drowned. They died too fast for pain. Greta nodded slowly, tears running down her face. Good, I'm glad he didn't suffer. He was doing his duty, Sullivan continued, following orders, trying to sink what he thought was a merchant tanker. He had no way of knowing it was a trap, no way of knowing 5 destroyers were waiting. Would it have changed anything if he did know? Sullivan thought about that. No, he would have attacked anyway, because that was his mission. That was his duty, just as my duty was to sink his submarine. So you had no choice. We always have choices, Greta, but sometimes all the choices are terrible. Your father could have chosen not to attack. I could have chosen not to set the trap. But then more merchant sailors would have died. More supplies would have been lost. The war would have lasted longer. More people would have died on both sides. He leaned forward. The arithmetic was brutal. 8 submarines and 400 lives against 67 merchant ships and 3,000 lives. The mathematics said we had to do it. Greta was quiet for a long time. Then my mother says you saved me. Sullivan blinked. What? She says that if Germany had won the war, I would have grown up under the Nazis, would have been taught to hate, would have been part of a system that killed millions. But because you won, because you killed my father and 395 of his comrades, I grew up in a free Germany. I was educated. I came to America. I am building a life where I can choose my own path. She looked at him with those dark eyes so much like her father's. So thank you, Captain Sullivan. Thank you for killing my father. Thank you for ending the war. Thank you for giving me the life I have now. Sullivan felt his throat tighten. I don't know if I can accept thanks for killing your father. Then don't accept thanks. Just accept acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that his death meant something, that it led to something better. That's all any of us can hope for, isn't it? That our lives and deaths mean something. Sullivan pulled Johnny's dog tags from his pocket, showed them to Greta. My brother died at Pearl Harbor. He was 22. Your father was 23 when he died. They were both so young, both had so much life ahead of them, and they both died in a war they didn't start. But their deaths ended it, Greta said. Their deaths and the deaths of millions of others ended the war and created the peace. That has to count for something. It does, Sullivan said. It counts for you, for your life, for your future, for the bridges you're going to build. Greta smiled through her tears. I'm studying structural engineering at M1T. Did my mother tell you she did? I want to design bridges, real ones across rivers and canyons, but also metaphorical ones, between nations, between people, between former enemies. She stood extending her hand. So I'm going to start by building a bridge between us, between the daughter of Georg Muller and the man who killed him, between Germany and America, between war and peace. Sullivan stood and shook her hand. Then on impulse, he pulled her into a hug, and Greta Muller, daughter of the man he killed, hugged him back. Your father would be so proud of you, Sullivan whispered. And your brother would be proud of you, Greta replied. When she left 2 hours later, Sullivan felt lighter than he had in 24 years. The weight wasn't gone, would never be gone, but it was easier to carry. That night, lying in bed with Sarah, Sullivan finally put Johnny's dog tags in a drawer. Not to forget, never to forget, but to acknowledge that the burden had been shared, that the weight was lighter now. I think I can sleep tonight, Sullivan said. For the first time in 24 years, or I think I can slay without dreaming of submarines sinking. Sarah squeezed his hand. Good, you've carried that weight long enough. And that night, for the first time since April 23rd, 1943, Sullivan slept through the night without nightmares. He dreamed instead of bridges, of Greta Muller designing structures that connected nations, of German and American engineers working together, of a world where the children of enemies became friends. He dreamed of a future worth fighting for. And in the dream, Johnny and Georg Muller stood together, young and smiling, watching the bridge being built, and they said, this is what we died for. This right here, this is what it was all about. And Sullivan believed them. April 23rd, 1993, Halifax, Nova Scotia. On the 50th anniversary of the battle, a memorial was unveiled in Halifax Harbor. A simple stone monument with the names of 8 German submarines engraved on one side and 6 American sailors engraved on the other. At the top, an inscription, on this night in 1943, 402 men died in battle. They fought bravely on both sides. They did their duty. They are not forgotten. James Sullivan stood before the memorial, 94 years old, now supported by a cane, flanked by Sarah and his children and grandchildren. Around him stood the last surviving members of his squadron. O'Brien, 82, holding Maggie's hand. Chen, 83, in a wheelchair. Martinez, 79, standing straight and proud. Jackson had passed away 5 years earlier. Reed had died in 1988. Most of the crew were gone now, claimed by time, if not by war. But the survivors were here, to remember, to honor, to bear witness. And standing with them by invitation were 3 Germans, relatives of the men who had died on the U-boats. A grandson of Klaus Hartmann, a great niece of Wolfgang Schneider, and Greta Muller, now 50 years old, a renowned engineer who had designed 15 major bridges around the world. The ceremony was simple. A naval chaplain said a prayer, A bugler played taps. A wreath was laid. Then Sullivan stepped forward to speak. 50 years ago tonight, he said, his voice still strong despite his age. We fought a battle here. 8 German submarines against 5 American destroyers. When it was over, 8 submarines had been destroyed. 402 men were dead. 6 American, 396 German. He paused, looking at the names on the memorial. For many years, I thought of this as a victory. We won, they lost. The arithmetic was simple. But now, 50 years later, I understand that there were no winners that night, only survivors. And the only real victory is standing here with me today. He gestured to Greta Muller. This is Greta Muller. Her father, Georg, died on U-309. He never met her, never held her, never saw her grow up. But his death and the deaths of 395 of his comrades helped end a war that had consumed the world. And his daughter grew up to become an engineer who builds bridges between nations. Sullivan's voice grew stronger. That's the only victory that matters. Not who won the battle, not who sunk more ships, but what happened after. The world we built from the ashes of war, the peace we created from the violence, the bridges we constructed from the wreckage. He touched the memorial stone. These men, American and German, did not die in vain. They died so that we could be here today, so that former enemies could stand together in peace, so that the grandchildren of the men who fought could be friends. Sullivan looked at Greta. So we honor them, all of them. The Americans who died doing their duty, the Germans who died doing theirs. We honor their sacrifice by living in the world they helped create. A world where Germans and Americans are allies, where former enemies build bridges together, where war is memory, not reality. He saluted the memorial. Fair winds and following seas to all who died here. May they rest in peace, knowing that their deaths meant something. The ceremony ended. People began drifting away. But Sullivan stood before the memorial for a long time reading the names. 6 American names he knew by heart. 396 German names he had never known until today. Greta Muller stood beside him. Thank you, she said quietly, for remembering my father, for honoring him. He was a good man doing his duty, Sullivan replied. Just like all of them, they all deserve to be remembered. Captain Sullivan, I have something for you. Greta reached into her bag and pulled out a worn photograph, the same photograph her father had carried, Hilda holding baby Greta, both smiling. My father had this photo with him when he died. It went down with U-309, but my mother kept the negative. She had a copy made. I want you to have it. Sullivan took the photo with trembling hands, looked at the faces of the woman and child, the woman his husband had died trying to protect, the child who grew up without a father. Why would you give me this? Because you need to see them as people, not as statistics, not as 396 casualties, but as men who had families, who had lives, who had futures that were taken from them. She pulled out another photograph, this one recent. Greta standing with 3 children and a man with graying hair. These are my children, Anna, Georg, and Klaus, and my husband, Michael. My father never met them, never knew them, but they exist because you won that battle, because you ended the war, because you created the peace where I could grow up and have a family. She pressed both photographs into Sullivan's hands. So carry both of these, carry the weight of what was lost, but also carry the joy of what was gained. That's the only way to bear the burden of war, to acknowledge both the past and the victory. Sullivan looked at the photographs, the past and the present, the death and the life, the war and the peace. He tucked them both into his jacket pocket right next to where Johnny's dog tags used to rest. Thank you, Greta. This means more than you know. I know exactly what it means, Greta said. It means we remember. It means we honor. It means we don't let their deaths be meaningless. As the sun set over Halifax Harbor, casting long shadows across the memorial, Sullivan stood with Greta Muller and the last survivors of his squadron, and for the first time in 50 years, he felt at peace. The war was over. The dead were honored. The living had built something better. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered. June 15, 2018. St. Mary's Church, Boston, Massachusetts. 73 years after Patrick and Margaret O'Brien were married, their great-granddaughter, Kate O'Brien, stood at the same altar preparing to marry a man whose last name was Mueller. Thomas Mueller, 32 years old engineer, grandson of Greta Mueller, great-grandson of Georg Mueller, who died on U-309. The church was packed with O'Briens and Mueller's Americans and Germans, descendants of men who had tried to kill each other, sitting in the same pews, celebrating the marriage of their children. On the altar, beneath a photograph of Patrick and Margaret on their wedding day in 1945, was another photograph, a ruined, torn, burned photograph with a hole through the center. The photo that had stopped the shrapnel, the photo that had saved Patrick's life so he could have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and this wedding. Kate O'Brien looked at that photo as she waited for the ceremony to begin. "Thank you, great-grandpa Patrick," she whispered. "Thank you for surviving, for coming home, for making this possible." Then she walked down the aisle toward Thomas Muller in the church full of O'Briens and Mullers, Americans and Germans, former enemies, now family, rose to their feet and applauded. Outside, the sun shone bright over Boston Harbor. 5 Navy destroyers were anchored there, modern Arleigh Burke-class ships that bore no resemblance to the Fletcher-class destroyers of 1943, but carried on the same traditions, the same duty, the same honor. And somewhere in the deep waters of the North Atlantic, 8 German submarines rested on the ocean floor beside the thousands of other vessels lost in the Battle of the Atlantic. Silent monuments to a war that ended, to men who died, to a peace that was built from their sacrifice. Fair winds and following seas to all who fought. May they rest in peace, knowing their deaths meant something. Knowing that 75 years later, the great-granddaughter of a destroyer captain married the great-grandson of a U-boat radio man, and everyone celebrated. Knowing that the bridges Greta Mueller designed were not just made of steel and concrete, but of hope and forgiveness and the stubborn belief that former enemies can become family. Knowing that this right here, this wedding between the descendants of men who tried to kill each other, was what they all died for. This was the victory. This was what it was all about. And it was worth it. Every death, every sacrifice, every moment of terror in the darkness, worth it for this, for love conquering hate, for peace outlasting war, for the children of enemies becoming family. That was the arithmetic. That was the mathematics. That was the only equation that mattered in the end.